It is completely possible to create a professional sounding mix and master inside GarageBand. The secret isn't in GarageBand, it's in how you use it. So in today's video, we're going to go through everything you need to know to create a professional mix and master inside GarageBand. But before we even get into it, let's fast forward to hear the before and after the song that we're going to be mixing together so you can decide if I'm someone you want to learn from.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
So if that sounds good to you, stick around. We're going to go through everything you need to know about mixing and mastering in GarageBand. In the first part, we're going to go through an overview. In the second part, we're going to start actually applying it to an actual mix in real time, so you can kind of watch over my shoulder as I'm doing it. You could jump ahead to part 2, but I'd highly recommend that you go ahead and stick around for part 1, which is an overview of the mixing process. Before we get into today's video, I also have something I want to give you. I've put together the ultimate GarageBand guide. This guide walks through recording, mixing, mastering, shortcuts, gear you need, really everything, and it's completely free from link in the description below. It also goes a little bit more in depth into some of the things that we're talking about in this video, so it can really help you out with that as well. And you can just quickly reference it anytime you're working on your mix. You can go to the mixing section and just find, how do I do compression? How do I do EQ? It's got all of that in it. So be sure to grab it, but let's go and get into today's video where we're talking about how to mix like a pro in GarageBand. So these 6 steps are: step 1, the static mix; step 2, master track processing; step 3, EQ on individual channels; step 4, compression on individual channels; step 5, effects like reverb and delay; and step 6, automation. Let's go ahead and break those down a little bit more, starting with step 1, the static mix. So the static mix is where we are mixing with only volume and pan. We are not focusing on any plugins at all in this stage. We are just getting our volumes perfectly dialed in. If you don't get your volumes right, your mix will never be right. Volume is absolutely the biggest thing in a mix. So you got to get your volume position set properly. Now, to do this, you need to take off all your plugins on your mix. So if you've added reverb or delay or other effects or EQ or compression and started to kind of mix it, take those off and focus on just getting your volume set properly. Once you have all your volume set properly, it's going to be way easier to make decisions for effects and EQ and compression, all that stuff. So start without any of those on. And to be clear, leave your GarageBand amp designer and things like that on that are creating the sound, but take off anything that was kind of mixing that you might have already done. And especially take off any sort of reverb and delay. Last caveat is that I do typically leave like reverb that I would have had on an amp in the amp designer on, because that's like if I'd mic'd it up in a real room, that's already in the recording. So anything like that that's part of the sound, leave it on. But if you've added reverb with any of the sliders or with a reverb plugin, take all that stuff off. Okay, so once you've set that up, take all your volumes down to 0, and then I have a couple tips for you. First, you want to download MV Meter 2 by TB Pro Audio and put it as the last plugin on your master track. Open this up and set it to peak standard, and then you're going to keep it up the entire time that you're setting your volumes, and you want to make sure that you never go past -6 to -3. Now, the reason that we do this is because you need to keep headroom at the top of your mix. So your computer has a point called digital 0 that after that point, it doesn't know what to do with the sound, and it just cuts it off. It just says, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm not going to do anything with it. And you lose that, and digitally distorts, and that sounds bad. And so what you need to do is mix below digital 0. And by having this peak standard meter up, we can see that we're staying safely below digital 0. So by keeping -6 to -3, somewhere in that range, definitely never over -3 on your static mix, then you know you have headroom that's clean and you don't have to worry about this digital distortion. So one more tip with this, don't worry too much about it. If you start to get close, just throw a gain plugin as the first plugin on your master track, and then you can turn it down a little bit. But don't try to just pull it way down after you didn't pay attention to setting your volumes. Set all your volumes, and if you start to see that you get close to digital 0, add a gain plugin and just turn it down a little bit. Okay, tip number 2 is to take advantage of wide panning. Now, if you want your mix to sound big and wide, you have to have some things panned all the way off to the left or all the way off to the right. I guess it would be left for you, right, for you. It's backwards because of the camera. Okay, so you have to have some things panned really wide if you want your mix to sound and feel big and wide. Now, you want to pay attention to the balance, make sure that's not leaning off to one side, but have some things that are panned far left and right. In that guide, I actually have a little sheet that will give you some tips for this as well, so check that out. But let's go and move on to step 2, which is master track processing. Now, master track processing, we're just trying to jumpstart our mix. This is where your entire mix runs together in one place. So by doing a little bit of processing here, we can jumpstart our mix and make it sound way more professional before we even start doing anything on individual tracks. So we only have 2 plugins that we're going to use here and try to accomplish 2 goals. We're going to start with EQ, and with EQ, we're just focusing primarily on the low end, the bass information where it feels right in the low end, and then the high end, right? And you just want to be listening and determining what moves you might want to do with this. So for example, if your mix feels a little bit harsh, maybe do just a little bit of a cut on the high end, and that's going to help your mix feel a little more rounded. If your mix feels really weak and thin, maybe a little bit of a boost in the low end is going to help your mix feel a little bit fuller, right? Or vice versa, if it feels a little bit overwhelming in the low end, just dial that back just a little bit, and your mix, before you even get into mixing on individual tracks, is going to be closer to the end product. Plus, this is going to save you a lot of time, because let's say your mix needs to be a little bit brighter. If you add a little bit of brightness on the master track, that's going to save you from having to go on to each individual track and adding brightness on each individual track. And so a little bit of processing on your master track can really, really help out with EQ. With this, you only want to be doing maybe up to 3 decibel boosts or cuts, right? Not big moves. If you're going 6, 7, 8 decibels, that is too much. It's never going to sound realistic or natural. So very, very subtle, very slight moves here, but you'll be amazed at what it can do. And then our second tool that we want to use is compression. Now, compression is going to help glue our mix together. It's just containing the dynamics a little bit, which is going to make it feel a little bit more cohesive, as opposed to just a bunch of disjointed tracks, right? So my biggest recommendation here is download Buster SE by Analog Obsession. This is a free compressor, and it is amazing. It is currently my favorite bus compressor. Analog Obsession is completely free, but if you do have the means, definitely do support them. It's all on their Patreon page, and there's a way for you to support them right there. But if you go to their link, they'll link to below, you'll see at the bottom of the posting, they have download links for free. They want them to be free, but if you have the means, definitely do support them. They're a great company. They have a bunch of really good plugins. We'll be talking about those more in upcoming videos as well. Okay, so once you've dialed in EQ and compression on your master track, you're going to be amazed at how much cleaner and fuller it sounds already. But now it's time to start diving into individual tracks with step number 3, EQ. EQ is maybe the most powerful tool that you have in GarageBand. This is how you shape the tone of your song. If you want your kick to cut through in the mix more, you're going to do that with EQ. If you want your vocals to have more presence, you're going to do that with EQ. If you want your bass to have way more low end, you're going to do that with EQ. EQ is the tool to get your mix sounding right. And it may look intimidating on face value, but there's really only 2 things you can do with EQ. You can cut, or you can boost. So you can either reduce or remove things, or you can add more of them. That's really it. It's just like on your car stereo, when you have bass, mids, and treble, you can either turn them up or turn them down. That's all you're doing. Now, you break this out across 6 zones, and each of those zones sounds very, very different. So you have sub information at the very bottom of an EQ. That sounds like kind of like how you feel it hitting your chest. That's way down there. You have bass. That's where it's really full sounding. You have low mids. That's again where it can be really full sounding. It's also starting to sound warm. You have mids. This is where it can sound boxy, or it can really be the body of the source. You have upper mids where you're starting to get into more presence. And then you have brightness, right? Each of these zones sounds very, very different. Not every source even has every zone. So you got to get familiar with an EQ, but they're not actually that hard to use. And be sure to grab the guide, because it has a little bit more helpful information and a literal cheat sheet for EQ that you can check out. Now, with EQ, I have 2 tips for you. Tip 1, if you struggle to hear EQ, boost like crazy. I mean, like as high as it will go, and move around and get familiar with what it sounds like at those different points. That's going to help you hear it. And then scale it back to a more reasonable amount, which is tip number 2, which is that most of your EQ moves are likely going to be somewhere between 4 to 6 decibels. You can go a little bit less, you can go a little bit more. Occasionally I'll do 15 decibels, 9 decibels, 10 decibels if I need to, but you always want to be thinking as little as you can, but as much as you need to. So don't limit yourself to only ever doing 3 decibels, 4 decibels, anything like that. Do as much as you need to, but as little as you can. So most of your moves will likely be around 4 to 6 decibels, but if you need to do more, do more. Okay, that takes us to step number 4, which is compression. Now, compression is where we're containing the dynamics of our song. We can add punch, add presence, add sustain, and contain the dynamics with compression. This is a really, really powerful tool because if you want your mix to feel impactful and full, compression is really going to be what's doing that. So, for example, on a vocal, vocals are very dynamic. Some words are way louder than other words. And so by using a compressor to turn it down on the louder words and turn up the quieter words, you can make everything just feel more consistent. It's going to make those vocals feel more upfront and more present. Or with something like a kick drum, you can have the compressor turn down right after the hit, and that's going to make that hit feel more impactful, right? Or something like a bass guitar, you could have it turn down on the loud part of a sustained note. You know, a note hits like this and falls off. We'll have it turn down that quieter part and then slowly let volume back up, and you're going to hear more of the sustain of that bass. So that guide has a lot of helpful information in how to set a compressor. I've also done an in-depth tutorial to using compression that I'll link to above here, and we're going to apply compression in our song coming up in the series, so also come back for that. Compression is a really powerful tool. It looks a little confusing on face value, but again, I absolutely know that you can understand it and start using it in your mixes. At the end of the day, you really only have to learn EQ and compression. That's it. Everything else is more just what do you like the next step that we're going to talk about, which is step 5, effects. Here we're talking about reverb and delay. That's the only 2 effects you really need to learn and use, and there's nothing that you necessarily have to learn about them. You just have to figure out what you like with them. With reverb and delay, it's just going through presets and maybe tweaking them a little bit, but there's nothing really technical about them. So a reverb is that sound if you walk into a huge room and you hear your voice just kind of floating around in the room. That's reverb. A delay is if you go to the Grand Canyon and you shout and you hear your voice come back to you. So it's like delay, 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 like hey, right? Okay, so that's a delay. And using these 2 effects, you can create very realistic or very interesting spaces in your song. Now, my biggest tip with effects is that less is more. If you do too much effects, you're going to cloud your mix. You could have a great sounding mix up to this point, and then if you dial in too much of the effects, it's just going to start to sound cloudy and muddy and really no good. So you want to do as little as you can, as much as you need to, but really as little as you can. I like to think of effects as being better felt than heard, so you should be just kind of dialing them in until you're feeling them. So I tend to focus on a couple of key elements like my snare drum and my vocal that have kind of my primary effects on them, and then other than that, I'm doing really, really subtle effects on other sources. Okay, so that is step 5, effects. Again, the guide goes a little bit more in depth, so be sure to grab the guide. And let's go and talk about step 6, which is automation. Now, this is when you're finishing your mix. This is just fine-tuning it, tweaking it that last little 5-10%, making sure that everything's the exact right volume, pan position, and that nothing's ever too loud or too quiet. And you can use this to add a little bit of interest. So if you want an effect to just come up for 1 second, be like way too loud, and it's like, whoa, what was that? You can do that with automation. So automation, it used to be that in a pro studio with like an analog console, you'd have to be manually moving the faders. You might have to have an intern or a couple of interns come in and turn knobs and move faders for you to get things at the right volumes in the mix while it's printing to tape. So you got to get it right. With GarageBand, you can do all this. You can have a billion little interns running around inside GarageBand moving things up and down for you at the exact right moment. And if you don't get it right, instead of ruining a whole tape, now you can just tweak it again and get it right. So with automation, it's infinitely variable. You can automate just about anything, but there's really 3 things that I would encourage you to focus on when you're starting out. Your lead vocal volume. So after you've set your compression, are there still occasionally words that you can't hear quite as well, or a phrase that might be a little bit too loud? Using a little bit of vocal automation on the volume can really help it just sit at the exact right volume. That's called vocal riding. And then the second is your pan position. So maybe you have something pan across in this point in the mix just to make it more interesting, or maybe you bring your guitars a little bit narrower in the verses and wider in the choruses so the choruses feel wider, right? Comparison is how you actually hear things. So if they get narrower for a second, then wider, you'll notice when they're wider. And then finally, the third is your effects. So if you want to bring your reverbs way up in the chorus so it feels big and anthemic, and then maybe down in the verses so it feels a little bit tighter, like you're in a room with the singer, play around with those effects and dial them up and down at different points in the song. Okay, so those are the 3: volume writing, pan automation, and effect automation. And that's it. You've now mixed your song like a pro. Now, mixing is not where we're going to make our song loud. This is really important to understand. Your mix is going to be quiet. That is the nature of the beast with mixing. Mastering is where we're actually going to make your song loud. When you're mixing, you're just trying to get it all to gel together in the mix. But if you want to take it out and listen to your car really quickly, you're on your headphones or your Sonos or your Bluetooth speaker, whatever, then you're probably going to want to turn up the volume a little bit. And we're going to do that with something called a limiter. So a limiter plugin, you just put it as the last plugin on your master track. You set the output to -1, and then you just pull up the gain until it's loud enough. This is typically going to be somewhere between 6 and maybe 12 decibels, but use your ears. If it starts to sound like it's squashing or just sounding weird, then you probably need to dial it back a little bit. And we'll fine tune actually bringing up the volume when we go to mastering. So don't think of this as being your final master. Just get it loud enough so you can go listen to it on those other sources without turning your volume all the way up on them. Okay, so that's it. That's mixing in GarageBand. If you do all those steps, if you follow them and work through them and get familiar with them, every time you do it, you'll get better and your mixes are going to sound more and more professional. Okay, be sure to grab the Ultimate GarageBand Guide from the link in the description below. It's really going to help you out. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. Have you been doing all these steps in the mixing process? If not, which ones have you been missing? Let me know in the comments below. But let's go and jump into a real example and start applying these to our song, starting with step 1, which is the static mix. This is where you're getting your entire mix laid out with just volume and panning. No plugins, no processing, just volume and panning. This is crucial because if you don't get your volumes right, your mix is never going to be right. But let's go ahead and get into the static mix. The first thing you need to do is take off any sort of processing that's not part of the sound. So if it's not adding to the sound, if you didn't intentionally dial it in to be part of the sound, more that you were either trying to mix or as a preset that GarageBand just slapped on there and you don't necessarily think it's helping, then I would go and take it off. If you like the way that sounds and you're fine with it, then I would leave it on. But for example, they put a compressor in this drum kit. This isn't the way that I'm probably going to approach the compression, so I'm going to go and take it off and I'm going to dial in compression on my own. And on the grit track, all of these are fine. I will mention like there is an EQ here, but there's nothing set on it. And on this grit track, there's an EQ, but I was just using this to cut out low end before the distortion so that there wasn't a bunch of distortion on the low end of my track. I wanted that to be nice and clean. So just cutting it out with an EQ. So I'm going to leave that on because it is part of the sound in my mind there. And then on the bass, like the bass amp, I do want to leave that on. I want to have that on there. On the guitar tracks, I obviously want to leave my guitar amps on here. Again, this EQ isn't actually doing anything, so we'll leave that on there. I am going to take off my MV Meter 2 on there because there's just no reason for it, and it's taking up computer processing power. So we'll go and pop those off on tracks that have it. These compressors aren't actually set, so they're not doing anything. Okay, we're all good. The rest of these are all just the default settings without any actual settings on them. Okay, so that is the first thing you need to do is clear out all of your processing that's not part of the sound. The second thing you need to do, and I know that this is scary, but we'll do it together, is take all of your volumes down to 0. So we're going to take each one of these volume faders down to 0, and we're also going to put pan positions back up to the center. We'll plan those out intentionally as we're going through this process. If you hold Option on the keyboard and click on a pan position, it will put it back up to center. With the volume faders, you do just have to pull each one down. Okay, I'm going to go and fast forward through, but you can watch me do it here. All right, and then the very last thing we need to do to get set up is open up our master track. And I'm going to get rid of all these plugins that are on here too. And we are going to put on, in the very last position, the MV Meter 2 plugin. If you haven't already downloaded, I'll link to it below here. And we need to set this, if you just click where it says VU, change it to peak so that it's reading the peak level, the absolute 0. VU is a different reading altogether, so you don't want to MVU, you want to make sure this is on peak. And then if you click right here, we'll fold it in half, and we're just going to put it up here. And now we can start mixing into this. And remember, what you're looking for here is that this max in the bottom right corner never hits past -3 at the absolute loudest. That's keeping safe, clean, and clear headroom from the top of our mix so it's not getting into digital distortion, which happens when you get to 0. Okay, so now we're just going to loop the loudest section of our song, which for us is this chorus here. And I like to start with my drums. All right, let's go and bring in the lead vocal.
Every day we keep racing through space.
click on it, we'll reset it. So we're already hitting -3 and we only have 2 elements in. So we're going to go ahead and bring these volumes down just a little bit. And let's listen to that again.
The universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my fears.
Let's go and bring in the grid track.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place.
Phase.
So stuck in phase.
Okay, again, we're at -3.4. We're starting to get close here. So I'm going to go ahead and take each one down by specifically 1 decibel. So -3.8 for this one. -21 here. -9 or 11 here. And this vocal, I think the vocals are going to be okay. I think it needed to come up a little bit anyway. Let's listen.
But I'm still standing
Try to bring that bass up a little bit here.
dressed in my fears. Every day we
Tambourine.
keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place.
Do this guitar here.
So stuck in place. Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my fears. Every day
Tenor guitar.
racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place. Every day the
Bring in an acoustic.
but I'm still standing here, dressed in my fears.
Okay, so notice that we've now hit -2.6. So you can, now that there's a bunch of stuff in, instead of going and trying to turn each individual track down, we're just going to go down to utility here and hit gain. And so now I've added a gain plugin as the top plugin on my master track. And now I can turn down the entire mix right here. So we're just going to go ahead and turn this down -2 to be safe. And pull the MV meter 2 back up. Check this. The acoustics are a little bit too loud. Bring in some more vocals.
But I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place. Every day
Do these halfway.
but I'm still standing here, dressed in my fears. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Cool. Let's listen to it again.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my fears. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm still stuck in place, so stuck in place. Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here,
Listen to this in solo.
dressed in my fears.
I want to get these relative vocal levels right.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm still stuck in place. So stuck in
Do a
place.
50% pan on these last two here.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still stranded here, dressed in my fears.
If you check on this meter up here when it's soloed,
Every day
the
we
top
keep
level is your
racing
left
through space,
volume, the bottom is your right
but
volume,
I'm
so you can make
still
sure it's
stuck in
even on the left and the
place.
right. Looks like the right
so
could come up
stuck
just
in
a little bit.
place.
Cool.
Every day
Let's listen to the context.
but I'm still standing here.
Sometimes when it restarts, for some reason, it will peak louder than it actually is. Let's look at this again here.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my fears. Every day we keep racing through space.
Okay. So we're at -1.5 now. Let's go and turn it down to -3 on the gain, and that will put us back in a safe range. Actually, it would be 3.5. -3.5. That'll put us back in a safe range.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here,
we still went a little bit over there, so we're going to go and turn this down -4.
Every day they do me fancy things, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
All right, let's go ahead and listen through a little more of the song, starting with this intro. Make sure we get all the parts here. Guitar should be up.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one. All day long I get no work done. All day long I get, what have I done? My work is a nice apartment, bed up on the apartment. My work is a nice
Too much there.
What? Every day they do me
Still a safe volume over here.
but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Bring the lead vocal up a little bit more.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in space. So stuck
Just with
in
a
space.
swell here. Cool. Okay, looks like we're still just a little bit too loud, so we're going to bring it down -4.4, and that's going to be it. That is how you set your static mix, right? Now, I know that you just watched me go through it. There's no better way than to do it than to just do it and do it a handful of times and get comfortable with it. I promise you, if you take your time to get your static mix right, you're going to have a better final mix. There's basically no way around it. If your volumes are set right, the final mix is going to sound better. So take your time and get this right. Don't stress too much about that peak level. Just keep your eye on it, and if you need to turn it down with a gain plugin, that's no problem, right? But just keep your eye on it as you're bringing things up, and as long as you're on top of it, you'll have no problem. But let's go and move on to the second step in the mixing process, which is master track processing. This little step can make a big difference in your mix and really jumpstart it and get you moving in the right direction. And it can save you time down the road, which you'll see in just a minute. But before we even get into it, I want to give you something. I've put together the ultimate GarageBand guide. This guide walks through everything: recording, mixing, mastering, has shortcuts, gear recommendations, really everything, and it's completely free from the link in the description below, so be sure to pick it up. But let's go and get into today's video where we're looking at master track processing. So if you've been following along, in the last video, we just set up the static mix of our song where we got all of our levels right, our volume and our pan positions, which is crucial. Now we're working on the master track. And the master track is one place that our entire mix runs through. So by doing two small little things on the master track, we can make our song sound a little bit cleaner, a little bit more professional, and kind of glue it together so it doesn't sound as much just like a bunch of disjointed tracks. It's going to be subtle stuff, but you'll see that it makes a big impact. So there's two ways to get to your master track. The first is if you're on any track and you hit B to bring up your smart control window, and then you just click. If you're on track here, just make sure you select master, and now you're looking at your master track. And we're going to be putting plugins, aka processing, on this master track to just gently process our entire song. The second way to get there is to scroll down to the bottom of your session, hold Command Shift and M on your keyboard, and that's going to bring up your master track. And now if you hit B, it will automatically be on your master track. You'll see that automatically. This is just a cool little fun feature. You don't need to have that. You can get to it from any one of these tracks as well. So just FYI. Okay, now before we start processing it, there's one more thing that we should do. We should export out our song as is, and you'll see why in upcoming videos, but we need to do it at this stage before we start doing any more processing on the actual song. So first and foremost, go up to your preferences, and we need to check something up here. In your preferences, under Advanced, we need to make sure that export projects at full volume is not selected. This will make sense, but in short, this is just a little bit of a handicap that doesn't actually help you and can kind of hurt you, at least in this stage. So make sure that that is not selected. All right, we're going to close that out. And now we're going to go up to Share, Export Song to Disk. And here, we're just going to do an MP3. It doesn't need to be a super high quality file. This is really just to be able to reference back to a static mix at further mix stages to make sure that we're moving it in the right direction, that we like what we've done. Okay, so pay attention to where you are actually saving this, and we're just going to title this static mix. It will export out. And once it's done, we just want to find it in the Finder, and we just want to drag it into our session and line it up with our song. So if I solo it now, and I mute it, we hear our song just as it is. Cool. Okay. So that gives us just a quick reference back to where we were in the static mix as we start to do actual processing on our song. Okay. Now that we've created that track, let's go back and start actually applying this master track processing. So first up, we want to do EQ. If you don't already have one set up in your master track, you can just go to EQ here and select the channel EQ. Now, with this, we really want to focus on two primary areas, our high frequencies, our bright frequencies, which are going to be up here, and our low frequencies. So let's just listen to a little bit of this and determine what we need before we actually do anything.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one. All day long I get no work done. All day long I get, what have I done?
Okay, to me, the main two things I'm hearing is I do think we could use a little bit more of that low end and just a little bit more crispy brightness up on the top. So let's dial that in while we're listening to the song here.
Lost my last
Starting with the
job,
low
can't
end.
lose this one. All day long I get no work done. All day long I get, what have I done? My work is a nice apartment made me better. Found apartment. My work is a nice apartment made.
Okay, notice how you just feel that kick drum and bass guitar a little bit more. We're not trying to get ourselves all the way there with these moves. We're just trying to dial it in a little bit. Generally speaking, you want to do up to 3 decibels. If you see down here, we will say gain up to 3 decibels on each of these moves. Okay, so I feel pretty good about the low end. Let's pay attention to the high end of this mix now.
What? Every day they do me first steps, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
So I'm trying to find how low I can get with this before it starts to get into stuff that I don't necessarily like. When I get down around here, it starts to sound kind of harsh to me.
But I'm so stuck in place.
But around here, it still feels pretty good. So you can boost more extreme to hear it, but then once you find where you like it, then scale it back a little bit. All right, let's go back to this verse here and listen to this one more time.
All day long I get, what have I done? My work is a nice apartment made me better.
Cool. Okay. So this is what's called a smiley face curve because it curves up on the sides. And the last thing you need to do with your EQ is just scale back the volume just a little bit to compensate for the fact that you've now added volume with this EQ. So each of these moves is adding a little bit of volume. So we want to use this output volume here to turn it back down just a little bit so that we're not adding any volume, which will make us think that we like it better. Our ears prefer louder things. So by balancing the output volume, we'll be assessing more accurately what the EQ is actually doing and not just liking it better because it's louder. Okay, so we're turning down just a little bit here, and we just want to make sure it's the same volume with the EQ off and on. So on.
My work is a nice apartment made me.
I actually think I maybe overdid it just a little bit. Let's try this.
What? Every day they do me first steps, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Okay, notice how much this already opens up the mix. We feel the low end a little bit more. We feel like the cymbals and the vocals just have this space in the upper end. It's almost airy sounding. Check this out. When I turn it off and on, this is off, on.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Pretty Cool, right? Okay, so the second move that we need to do is setting some compression. Now, compression, we're just trying to glue the track together a little bit, and I highly recommend that you get Buster SE by Analog Obsession. This is a free bus compressor that sounds really, really great. I know this looks confusing, but you can literally ignore everything right here and just pay attention to these 6 knobs over here. That's all you got to pay attention to. Now, with bus compression, you generally speaking want a slow attack time to maybe like a medium attack time. You want to be either on 30 or 10 for just about any bus compression. We're going to start on 30 and we might pull it up to 10, and then a fast release. So either on this first option, the second option here, or occasionally I'll go all the way to auto, but we're going to start on just this first option, which is the fastest release. So a compressor is going to turn down when the signal gets too loud. So we're going to set a threshold. When the signal gets too loud, the compressor is going to turn it down a little bit. It's kind of like an automatic volume fader. And so it can get your tracks moving together in one place. It's a really cool tool. Okay, the last thing we need to do is dial up the ratio a little bit. If you're working on a lighter song, I generally would be doing 1.5 to maybe 3 on the ratio. On a rock song, you can be going up to 4 is probably about the highest I would go. You could even do still lighter on a rock song as well. This one's a pretty straightforward rock song. I'm going to start on 3 to 1. That's a pretty good starting point. And then we're just going to bring the threshold down and listen to the compression as it's engaging, set it a little bit extreme, decide on our attack and our release, and then we'll dial it back up to a more reasonable amount. So let's go. Let's just loop this chorus because you want to be setting it in a louder section of your song. So I think I want a faster attack time because I'm not really getting enough of the drums caught in this compressor, I don't think. Now it's pretty aggressive.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Now listen, I'm going to make this really extreme for a second. Listen as I bring the attack time to be really fast, how the drum hits kind of disappear a little bit.
Every day we keep space, but I'm still standing here.
Compared to here, right? So that's a good cue. Listen to the drum hits and how this compressor is impacting. I think I like this setting pretty well. Okay, and then as you're setting your threshold and dialing it back up, you want to look at the meter here, and you're just looking for it to be doing up to 3 or 4 decibels. You could go a little bit higher than that, but generally up to 3 or 4 decibels in this louder section of the song. Start it off. Okay, now the last thing I did there was I dialed up my makeup gain to make sure that it wasn't losing any volume as the compressor was turning it down. Here, I just ended up with about 1.5 decibels, seems to be about the same when this is off and on. There's 2 bypasses on this plugin, by the way. You can do main over here as a bypass or the blue button up here. Okay, so let's now listen to what our mix sounds like with just these 2 plugins off and on. Check it out here. Let's start in this verse.
Get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
So it's kind of boxy. Drums are a little punchier.
What?
Crazy, right?
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Cool. Okay, so that is master track processing, just 2 moves, EQ and compression, and just dialing in those couple of things are really going to tighten up your mix, give it a little bit of a professional sheen with the EQ, and glue it together with the compression. It's not particularly hard to do, and if you do this at the start of your mixing process, as you get into individual moves, those EQ moves are going to save you a lot of time because you're not going to have to do as much EQ on individual tracks. Now I've added a little bit of brightness and low into my entire mix. I'll do a little bit less of those moves on each individual track, right? And then similar with compression, now that I've compressed the entire signal a little bit, I'll do a little bit less compression, most likely on some individual tracks. Okay, let's go and move on to the third step in the mixing process. The first time we're going to start doing anything on individual tracks, and that is with EQ, which is the most powerful tool you have in mixing in terms of developing the tone of your song, which I think we can all agree getting a good tone in our song is important, right? Okay, so before we get into today's video, I also have something I want to give you. I've also put together the ultimate GarageBand guide. This guide walks through everything from recording, mixing, mastering, gear you need, shortcuts, all that stuff, and it's completely free from the link in the description below. So be sure to pick that up. There's actually a really helpful EQ cheat sheet built into that guide. So download that. That's going to help you when it comes time to EQ in your mix. But let's go and get into today's video where we're going to EQ the song that we've been working on together. So EQ is a tool that allows us to just shape the tone in our mix. We have 3 goals when working with EQ. We want to minimize the bad, so kind of minimize things that we don't like, highlight the good, things that help it cut through in the mix that we like the sound of, and then make space for every source, because your song likely has multiple elements going on in it, and you can't have everything be huge and full. You need to kind of make space so everything can fit together in the mix. So those are our 3 goals with EQ. Now we're going to go through in this video and actually EQ this song together, so you'll get to see me go through this across the entire mix, and I'll walk through some of the decisions I'm making while I'm making them. But EQ is a huge tool. I've actually developed an entire course built around it. I'll link to that below if you're interested. No pressure. We're going to get deep into EQ in this video today as well. But before we get into it, let's fast forward to the end of this video and listen to the before and after of this song with EQ on it, so you can hear how much impact it really has on the mixing process. Check it out. Okay, so let's listen to it. Now, the other day we exported out our static mix, so our mix with just volumes and panning, and now we can use that as a guide to compare our mix after EQ to what it sounded like before EQ. So let's listen to the mix before EQ, and then when I turn this off, it will be after EQ. Let's check it out. So this is no EQ.
Every day they do different mistakes, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Pretty crazy, right? Okay, so now that you know how much impact that really had on the mix, let's go through and look at EQ first, and then we're going to go through and actually apply it to each individual track. So let's just break down an EQ really quickly first. So EQ is broken out into 3 types of tools. You have a bell. This looks like a bell, pretty obvious, and you can boost and cut with a bell. So there's only 2 moves you can do with an EQ. You can boost or you can cut. Then you have a shelf. A shelf you can boost or cut with. A shelf is just going to boost from this point and above on the frequency spectrum, or if you do a low shelf from this point and below. So that's our second type. And then our third type is what's called a filter. And a filter is just going to completely cut out anything from the point you set here and below, or if you do a high cut filter, it's going to cut out everything from here and above. So those are 3 types of moves. Now, as I mentioned, with the bell and shelf, you can either boost or cut with them, and that's going to be really helpful, and you'll see how we'll use that throughout. But just simplify it and think about on your car stereo, you can turn up the bass, mids, and treble on your car stereo. It's the same kind of thing here. The only thing that's fully different here is that you get more access to which specific parts of the bass, mids, and treble, and you can filter out, just completely remove parts of sound, which can be really helpful to clean up your mix and make everything fit together in it. And then lastly, we have a frequency that spans from 20 hertz at the bottom here all the way up to 20,000 hertz. So 20 hertz is like super sub frequencies, low end frequencies like that hit you in your chest. 20,000 hertz is where it's super bright and crispy. Now 20,000 hertz, we actually start losing hearing from the top down as we age. So there's a good chance you can't actually hear 20,000 hertz, but just you can still perceive it a little bit most of the time. You just might not be able to really specifically pick up on those specific frequencies. But anything here 8K and above is like the really, really bright high-end frequencies. And then on this EQ, at least built into GarageBand, you also have a frequency analyzer, which allows us to see what's actually going on here. If I turn this on. But you don't want to rely on this, but you'll see how I use that very specifically at a few points throughout this mix. And then the very last thing you need to know is that you can boost or turn down the output volume. So because an EQ is adding or taking away volume throughout it, so I'm specifically adding volume to these frequencies, I can add volume to a source, which can throw off my mix because I spent time getting my mix all ready, right? So if you do a lot of boosts, you might need to do a little bit of a cut on the output to make sure you're not adding volume, throwing off your mix, and tricking your ears into thinking you like it better just because you made it louder. Our ears tend to prefer louder things. So let's go and set these back to 0. I'm actually just going to turn this EQ off because this was just for demonstration purposes. And now we're going to go back over to tracks and we're going to start EQing on individual tracks. Now, I can't stress this enough. You should only be EQing for something that's going to help the mix as a whole. It does not matter what it sounds like in solo. It matters what it sounds like all together. So I don't care if that guitar sounds a little bit muddy in solo, if it sounds good when everything is together. But you can go in and out of solo to help you find specific things, or if you're like, I can tell something's off here, but I'm not exactly sure what, going into solo can help with that. So I have no problem going to solo. I go into solo regularly, and you'll see me do it throughout this video, but you should always be thinking in the context of the mix, what do you need? So let's just start with these drums, and then we'll move down through this mix together. So starting with these drums, let's listen for a minute, and let's talk about what we might need with EQ here.
Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? My work is a nice apartment.
Okay, so what I hear is that I just want a little bit more super low-end impact out of my kick drum. I want a little bit more crack out of my snare drum, and I also want my snare drum to have a little bit more body. And I'm also thinking about my mix as a whole and knowing that my bass ultimately is going to be my primary low-end source, and so I want to make a little bit of space for that as well. So let's start by making a little bit of space by using a filter here to just cut out a little bit of the low-end frequencies, nothing that's making us lose something about this drum kit, but just to make sure that we have a little extra space down in the super low-end for the bass guitar. Let's listen in solo here to hear that. So this filter, as I pull it up, starts to get really thin, right? We don't want to be losing anything for our goal today right now, at least. So I'm just going to bring it up to around here, where I still feel like I'm hearing the kick drum as I want to, but I'm making a little bit of extra space in the super low end for the bass guitar. Okay, the second thing I want to do is add a little bit more low-end impact to my kick drum, so let's find a point for that. Now, this is where the frequency analyzer can be helpful. What you're looking for is the lowest point of sound when the kick drum is hitting. So this is what's called the fundamental, and it looks like it's somewhere around this range here. So now let's use our ears and find a specific frequency, and we'll boost like crazy to find it. Let's listen in the context of the mix and see what sounds good with everything else.
Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
So right around there feels pretty good to me. All right, now let's make it a little bit more reasonable.
All day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
Yeah, that feels better. There's just a little bit more low-end impact from that kick drum. You might not be able to hear it if you're not wearing headphones, but with headphones, you can definitely hear it. All right, let's just take a second and try to find, I want a little more body on the snare drum as well. So again, I can see that snare drum hits. That's the lowest point that the snare drum hits there. So if I do just a little bit of boost around that. Okay, just trying to find where it sounds good with everything else. It only matters that it works with the whole mix, right?
What have I done?
A little bit higher than I might have done just looking at the frequency spectrum. Somewhere right around 200 sounded best in the mix for me. Really subtle there. All right, let's try to bring out a little more crack of the snare. And that's going to come up here in this like presence range. It starts to feel almost like tinny to me up here. I like the sound of it around here.
What?
And in terms of width, because you can adjust how wide these are, I can make them really narrow or really wide. You just want to be making sure that you're only impacting the frequencies you want to impact. And not, super wide is going to impact a bunch of frequencies. Maybe you want that, but a lot of times you're just looking in a specific area. So I try to go as narrow as I can, but as wide as will get me the sound that I'm looking for. Very, very rarely, I should say, though, are you going to do something super narrow. I would say, unless you're specifically trying to cut out a ring or something, don't do a really, really narrow cut. Okay, or boost. Okay, and then the last thing is now I'm hearing like a little bit of woofiness on the kick drum. So let's find one more EQ point here. Okay, that was a weird sound. We're just gonna take this, and I think it's gonna be down in the low end. Let's see if we can find it. I think it's gonna be somewhere in this range here. Okay, let's listen to this in solo, and I want to show you. Let's first actually balance the volume off and on really quick. I'm adding just a little bit of volume, so I'm going to do a very small reduction over here on the output. And then let's listen before and after to these drums. So this is before with EQ, and then when I take it off. A little more crack to the snare, a little bit more low into the kick drum. Listen to how the snare cuts through the mix a little bit better. The kick drum has a little bit more impact in the mix when this is on, this is off. Right? Very small moves. I think I could bring up the body of the snare a little bit here. I'm good with where the kick drum is. I want a little more body out of that snare though. Right? Okay. So subtle moves, but they add up. And you'll see, you already heard at the very beginning of this that the sum is bigger than the individual parts, right? Okay. Let's look at the grit track really quickly here. So this is our distortion track. And I'm actually going to add a fresh EQ after the pedal board. If you saw my video on production elements, we dialed this in there. So what I'm looking for here is to just bring out a little more of that snare sound. So I just want to find where this snare sounds good on this track. Somewhere around there feels good to me. Very small reduction here. Cool, okay. Very subtle EQ on that, but again, the sum of the parts is going to be huge. Okay, first little extra bonus tip is that you don't need to EQ everything. So for example, I don't need to EQ this tambourine. It's doing what I want it to. I don't need to EQ this bass bomb. It's doing what I want it to. Same with the swell. So we're going to jump up to the bass guitar now. And with bass guitar, you got to trust your ears and find what you need in the context of your song. But I know in this song, I probably want a little bit more low end and then a little bit more of it cutting through in the mix. But let's listen to it and see what we think. Let's listen in the verse and see if we agree. I can hear it better in the verse, but I'm losing a little bit in the chorus. So what I want to focus on is bringing out the low end, which is going to come down here in the super sub range, and just started the low end range right here. And we're just going to play around until we find the right frequency for that. gonna set a high pass filter here just to make sure it doesn't extend on forever to where I can't actually hear it. This helps you keep a tighter, cleaner low end. If you're listening on good headphones, you can already hear that's adding a lot of low end there. If I take this off. And then let's find where it cuts through a little bit more. This is typically around 1K on a bass guitar. So let's listen to this here. Let's listen to the context. Right around 1K, just above 1K there. So I'm going to make that a little bit smaller, narrower, and a little bit smaller. Bring this down a little bit. Output volume. Alright, let's listen in the context. Let's start in this verse here. So this is off. This is on. You just feel the low end more right there. Same in the chorus here. Cool. Okay, let's look at electric guitars here. So with electric guitars, it varies, but one of the biggest places that I make space for other sources with electric guitars is to cut out the super low frequencies for the bass and the super high frequencies for the kind of vocals or acoustic guitars or cymbals. That's what I really want up in these super high frequencies up here. And I find that on an electric guitar, they're often just kind of fizzy. So I can cut them out. I'm not necessarily losing anything. So let's start by just cutting that down a little bit. I'm going to do this in solo to make sure I don't get into what I like about the sound. Okay, that helps a little bit for sure. Let's cut out some of the low end too for the bass and kick. So this already just contains the sound a little bit. Takes away a little bit of that fuzz up top. A little bit of the muddiness down in the bottom. Okay, now in the context, let's listen and see what else we might want out of this guitar sound. Okay, so I think I want a little more warmth out of this, and I also want a little more presence out of this. Now, again, on that guide that I mentioned at the beginning, I have a little cheat sheet that shows you where you can find warm frequencies and tinny frequencies and boxy frequencies and presence and body and all that stuff. So definitely check out that guide. This will help you when you're making your EQ decisions. So thinking through this, I want this to be a little bit of a warmer guitar tone, and I want it to cut through the mix a little bit more. So warmth is going to come from down here, and then cutting through the mix is going to come up here in like the presence frequencies. So let's listen to the context of the mix here and find where warm frequencies work. I like it right around there. Somewhere right around 300 is working for me. So let's scale this back. Let's also make it a little bit narrower. It's subtle, but it's really filling out that guitar right there. Let's find a little bit of presence here now. Up to this point. So let's figure out where this works in the context of the mix. What frequencies sound good in the context of everything. On this guitar, I like it somewhere around like 3.5, almost 4,000 hertz here. So you see 3,000, 4,000 hertz. Little bit. Okay, let's reduce the volume a little bit since we've added with 2 boosts here. We have cut a little bit of the frequencies out, so I don't necessarily need to take it out all the way and make it totally like super reduced, but just a little bit. to where it sounds like it's the same volume. Listen to how much fuller and more balanced this sounds with EQ on. This is like a little bit thin. This is fuller and more present. Cool. Okay, now I'm going to follow that same approach for the other two electric guitars, so I'm going to skip ahead just to save a little bit of time here, and then we'll come back for acoustic guitars. Okay, so got the electric guitars here. Again, as you can see, very similar moves. And now let's listen to these acoustics. Now, with acoustics, again, you got to be thinking with everything, what role is it serving in the mix? So the way I might EQ an acoustic guitar in the context of a bigger rock mix is going to be different than a singer-songwriter acoustic guitar. With the singer-songwriter, you want a big full sound, but you could end up with a very similar looking EQ to me. It just depends. So you got to use your ears and you got to think about what you want. So what I want from this acoustic guitar is for it to add a little bit of warmth and then also add a fair amount of just like the rhythmic element. So these acoustics are doing this very rhythmic strumming here. And I want that to cut through. I think it's already cutting through pretty well. But I'm going to see if I can bring it out just a little bit more in the context of the mix. So I want to make sure I still have warmth, but I don't have anything wonky, anything that I don't like, so minimizing the bad. And then I also want to clean out a little bit of low-end space for electric guitars, or the bass guitar, I mean. So let's look, starting with that. You see how it's just kind of like hittering around down here a little bit? We just want to cut that out completely. And I'll do this in solo to make sure I'm not getting in the way of something I like. So initially I started to cut here, but I want the warmth that's coming in around 100 hertz. So somewhere around there is working pretty well for me. On some acoustics, I might cut all the way up to here in a rock mix, just to make space for those lower mid-range frequencies for the electric guitars or something. Okay, let's listen here. This is working. Okay, I feel like I hear a little bit of a ring. Let me turn this volume up here just a little bit for you. So I'm at negative 13. Okay, you notice as I went over right around 400, you kind of hear like a ring jump out at you. Let's cut that out just a little bit. I feel like I still hear a bit of a lower ring. A little bit more here. Okay, when I turn this off, notice how you hear that ring come in. So this is on. When I turn this off, you'll hear a ring pop up. And this addresses it. To exaggerate it here for you, this is what that ring sounds like. You can hear it just a little bit. And then it goes away when I turn that EQ on. So that's minimizing the bad at its finest. I'm cutting out a ring pretty aggressively there. And then let's see if we can find something in the context of the mix that helps it cut through just a little bit more. So I'm keeping a fair amount of this warmth. I'm just getting rid of something, minimizing the bad here that I don't like right here. And let's see if we can find something upper in these upper frequencies. Now this acoustic to me feels almost thin, almost brittle. Up in these like super bright frequencies. Some acoustics don't, and you got to give them a pretty good shelf up here, kind of like this, to help them have that brightness. I don't think I need that, but I do feel like I could maybe benefit from something up here in the upper mids presence range. So let's try to find that in the context of the mix. Okay, for me, that kind of jumped out at me immediately right when I went over it. Down here, it felt kind of harsh. Up here, it felt kind of, I don't know, weird. And as soon as I hit this sweet spot, it immediately was like, that's what I'm looking for to bring out just a little bit more of. Listen to it as I pan across those frequencies in this context. Let's go back to the start of this course. A little bit harsh around here. Feels pretty good. Pretty good still. No good. So I'm looking for something right around here. Let's try to find the exact spot. Right around there. Okay, now I brought the volume of this up quite a bit. I think it was 13.4 if I remember correctly. So we'll bring that back down. So notice this. I'll bring it back up for just 1 second. Notice we have that ring. This addresses that ring, and it makes it just a little bit brighter in a way that's going to help it cut through in this mix. Okay, I also think these could come up a little bit from where they are. Right now, I'm going to bring them up 3 decibels from where they were, which is a pretty good amount. Let's see if we like that. Let's listen to the intro. Okay, I think I like that pretty well. Okay, so that is how I approach acoustics. I'm going to go ahead and EQ the other acoustic. Very likely that it's going to be the exact same settings. So sometimes what I'll do, if it's literally the same, in this case it was the exact same mic, exact same acoustic, I can copy and go down to this other acoustic and go up here to paste. But let me listen to that really quickly. I'll go and fast forward through this, and then we'll come back and work on the vocals together. Okay, so got those acoustics. I will say I split the difference volume-wise. I ended up turning them back down just a little bit from where I brought them up to. But this is a good example of how, yes, you get all your volumes right in the static mix, but you can tweak things a little bit as you go, which is why I don't automate until the very end on volumes. That way, if I need to just adjust that acoustic a little bit, I can keep tweaking it and massaging it, so by the end of the mix, I feel like everything's really in their exact right place. Okay, let's talk about vocals really quick. So vocals, they can be tricky, but ultimately you want to do as little as you can, but as much as you need to, because a vocal is a very natural source and you don't want to overdo it. But different frequencies can build up because of the microphone or the room. So we're going to try to address that a little bit on this vocal recording. So let's start by just listening to it and seeing what we think this vocal needs. Okay, so my initial impression from that vocal is that it sounds a little bit boxy. So again, go check out that sheet and see if you can find like the boxy area. And I think it could have a little bit more like warmth to it, which is going to come down to like the low mids, low end area, and then a little bit more presence. So the boxiness is what's kind of helping it cut through the mix right now. And on this case, at least, it might be a little bit higher than some. It's almost like a nasally sound.
All day long, I get no work done. All day long, I get what have I done.
But there's something right around here that's not working for me, I think. Let's listen to that verse again.
Lose this one all day long.
So let's start by just cutting out things we don't need. So we'll do a high pass filter here.
I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done.
Let's try to bring in a little bit more warmth. I'm again going to do this in the context of the mix.
My last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done. Lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done.
Cool. Okay, so notice how much more warmer this vocal sounds. Turn this off. All right, let's listen through like the frequency range right above it here. I think that's where I'm hearing that boxiness. I'm going to try to just cut that just a little bit. And let's see if we can bring out a little bit more presence here.
All day long, I get no work done. All day long, I get what have I done. Lost my last job, can't lose this one. All day long, I get no work done. All day long, I get what have I done.
So on this vocal, I'm really liking around 3K there, but with a pretty wide boost. So I'm getting some all the way down to about 1K almost, and then up into the 6K range. then we have the super bright frequencies up here.
Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
Okay, gonna turn it down just a little bit because we're adding some volume. And let's listen to this off and on. So this is off.
Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
So in solo here, listen for how it gets fuller and a little bit more present and up front and a little less boxy.
Lost my last job, can't lose
This is
this
on.
one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
Okay, now vocal EQ can really be broken down into a few steps. I'm going to link to a video I've done above here specifically on vocal EQ. It's a whole video just on vocal EQ, so definitely go check that out. And in fact, I'll also say that I've done an entire vocal mixing series that just focuses on vocals that I think is a great complement to what we're going to do in this series, because we're going to focus on the entire song here, but you got to focus on vocals some too. So while I'll cover everything on vocals, I can't go as in-depth as I did in that series. So that video is part of that series, so check out that video and then you can see the series around it as well. Okay, so let's talk about backing vocals a little bit here, and then I'll do the same thing where I fast forward through doing all of them. But backing vocals, I'm basically doing the same thing, but I'm kind of taking the opposite approach. I want them to be present, but at the same time, I don't want them to get in the exact same space as a lead vocal. So it's pretty common for me that I won't mix them quite as bright as a lead vocal, but I might bring out a little more presence depending on how they're recorded. So listening to this vocal here, this is our double on the lead vocal.
Prove my worth with the nice apartment.
Let's cut out this low end that we don't need.
Prove my worth with the nice.
And what jumps out at me initially is that it feels a little bit muddy and kind of boxy. Let's listen around here.
Nice apartment, maybe then I'll find a partner. Prove my worth with the nice apartment.
Right around there. I think if I just cut that a little bit and then give it a little bit more presence. Let's find this in the context here. I'm going to make this a little bit narrower. Somewhere around there is feeling pretty good to me, so about 3K again. It's a little bit more balanced sounding. And then I'm actually going to make it a little bit darker in the super bright frequencies so that that space can be reserved for the lead vocal. Prove my worth with the nice apartment, maybe. Let's look at the input-output. I think we're about the same off and on because I've done boosts and cuts. I actually think I've lost a little bit of volume, so I'm going to add a little bit of volume on the output over here. Okay, so I'm going to go through the rest of these vocals here, and then we'll come back and we will listen through the entire mix together and see the before and after. Okay, so let's listen to it. Now, the other day we exported out our static mix, so our mix with just volumes and panning, and now we can use that as a guide to compare our mix after EQ to what it sounded like before EQ. So let's listen to the mix before EQ, and then when I turn this off, it will be after EQ. Let's check it out. So this is no EQ. Right? It's a lot fuller, it's a lot more present, it's more upfront. There might be a little bit of volume difference here and there just because of all the EQ we applied across the tracks, which is one reason you want to keep a good amount of headroom at the top of your mix when you're setting your volumes. But overall, that's just coming from getting the tones right and slowly and in small subtle moves, making more space in our mix, highlighting the good and minimizing the bad. And you do that and you get a fuller, louder, more present, more upfront sound. Okay, so that's EQ. Again, grab the Ultimate GarageBand guide from the link in the description below. It has an EQ cheat sheet built into it. It's really going to help you out. Well, let's go and move on to the fourth step in the mixing process, compression. Compression is the tool for determining your dynamics, and this is such an important part of a mix. Getting your dynamics right is really the difference between kind of a good or okay sounding recording and a great sounding recording. If you want your mix to be larger than life, feel really upfront, feel really present, feel really punchy, really dynamic, compression is the tool for that. It makes sure that you can hear every last little word, every last little bass note, and it makes sure that your drums are punchy and full, that it's all cutting through. Now, you may have heard compression in like a negative sense when people are like, oh, the compression is really making this sound bad. That's not what we're talking about here. Compression here is an extremely powerful tool. Every record you've ever heard on the radio is using compression all over the place inside of it. So you can't forget compression. You can't sleep on compression. And unfortunately, the compressor that's built into GarageBand is not great. There's no good way to put it. It's not great. It's probably the biggest limiting factor currently built into GarageBand. But the amazing thing is that there's 4 amazing free compressors by Analog Obsession that you can download that I've talked about in this video, I'll link to above here, that you definitely can use to fill in that gap inside GarageBand. So we'll be using all those in this video, and I'll mention each one, and obviously I'll be pulling it up, and I'll have links for all those down below. So as we get to those, definitely just check out the links if you need them, or go check out that video above and go ahead and download them so you're all ready to go with this video. But getting into it, compression may sound complicated, it may seem complicated, but just think of it as an automatic volume fader. So a compressor is just a way to automatically turn down the sound when it gets too loud. So you set a threshold. When the sound starts to get too loud, the compressor will automatically turn it down when it goes past the threshold that you set. And how quickly it turns it down and lets it back up, and how much it turns it down and lets it back up is all determined by you. And so you can really dial it in. So for example, if you want a drum to get really, really punchy, well, you can let it pass your threshold for just a second, hold there for a second, then get turned down. So slightly slower compression. That makes that drum hit even harder because it hits through really quick and then gets turned down. So that initial hit is even punchier, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so you can see how that can be really helpful with drums. But let's say something like a bass guitar. Well, a bass guitar, you might have some sustained notes, right? Well, so you hit a note and then that sustain trails off. Well, if you turn down that initial bit just a little bit, and then the compressor lets off gently over the span of the note, so it turns it down and then lets the volume back up, you've now increased the sustain of that note. Or let's say you have a vocal and you have one word here that's super loud and the next word is really quiet, the next word is kind of loud, the next word is really loud, the next word is really quiet. Very common in vocals, right? One word's loud, one word's quiet. Well, the compressor is going to turn down the louder word more. It might not turn down that quieter word at all. Then it's going to turn down the medium word less than the louder word. It's going to turn the really loud word down more. And by doing this and applying some makeup gain, now all of our words are going to be closer together. So this may seem a little confusing, but watch how we do it in this video and it's going to all click for you. But let's go and get into it and let's start going through compression. Now in this mix, our goals are primarily to make the drums punchier, to make the bass a little bit more consistent and sustained throughout the song so it's never spiky and never lacking. Make the vocals super even, and then just generally tame the dynamics of our guitars just a little bit more. So let's go and get into it, starting with the drums. Now, with everything you do in the mixing process, you want to be working with intention. So you need to listen first and determine what it is you're trying to do. But a lot of times with drums, you're trying to make them punchier. So we're going to use a plugin from Analog Obsession here called Speed Comp, and I'll link to it below. And this is just a great general compressor that has a lot of variability to it. You see a lot going on here, but first notice you have your threshold. That's going to be the threshold that you set. And when sound gets past it, it gets turned down. You have a ratio, which is how much it will be turned down by. So a higher ratio will turn it down more. You have over here your attack time, which is how quickly it's going to turn that sound down. You have a release, which is how quickly or slowly it's going to let it back up. And then we're just going to ignore this knee over here. You don't need to worry about it. And then makeup gain is just how you make up the gain, the volume that was lost by the compression turning down the signal, so you're not losing any volume to that source. Okay, now that we've gone through everything here, let's listen to our drums in the context of the song and determine what it is we think we might want from this compressor on them. Okay, so the drums sound great. There's nothing wrong with these drums, but I'd love to get a little bit more punch and a little bit more energy out of them. So what I'm going to do, first I'm going to extend this loop just a little bit here, and then let's solo these drums and let's listen to really extreme settings on this so you can kind of see how this can vary the sound. So we're going to start by just bringing our threshold down so that the volume of the drums gets caught and starts getting turned down by the compressor. And we see how much it's turned down by over here on this meter. Now 4:1 is a pretty good ratio on drums, pretty standard. And 100 milliseconds is an extremely slow attack time. 1.5 milliseconds is a pretty fast attack time. With drums, you want to be doing a kind of medium-ish attack time to be letting that transient through most of the time. So if we're starting here, let's say around 30 milliseconds, and I'm going to bring it down, and as you notice that as it gets faster, the initial hit of the drum is going to kind of disappear. So listen as I get down here how the initial hit just disappears on this drum. We'll start up here. It's punchy here. Compared to, let me turn the makeup gain here. Right? Okay, so what I want to do is find where it is letting that hit through so that it's a little bit punchier and then it's turning it down. So I don't want to be doing a super fast attack. So I'm going to start around 30 milliseconds and I'm just going to bring it up until I notice that it's starting to squash the drum. That's not necessarily good, at least not for what we're going for on these drums. So it starts to sound squashed around here to me compared to here. It's a little bit tamer. Okay, I'm liking this. That listen to how much more energy that has. Let's go back to just that drum hit at the end there. It like has a lot of energy. If I take this off, sounds good, but it didn't have so much energy, right? This helps bring out that energy. Now, let's set the release. So this is how quickly it's going to be letting it back off. And what I'm typically going for here on a drum is that it's kind of moving in time with the drum. So turn this back on. So this is really fast. It's just immediately letting it back off. It's actually pretty good right there. So what you notice, it will go ka, 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 and it like comes back on as the snare's releasing, right? If that makes sense. So pay attention to that snare sound, ka, ka, and listen how when I'm right here, you don't notice the tail of the snare quite as much, and then as we slow it down just a little bit, it is kind of moving in time with the snare drum. Versus, right? So somewhere around 150 is sounding pretty good to me. Okay, so this right now is really, really extreme compression. That helps you hear it. When it's really subtle compression, you're not going to hear it as well. So what I like to do is set it really extreme and then dial it back and dial it back in. So somewhere around here. That starts to be a little extreme. And I can see here how much is happening. There's no rules that you need to follow here, but if you're looking for little compression, then anywhere from 1 decibel, which would be like just this needle kicking around a little bit, up to, 4 would be the kind of generally lighter compression. 4 is starting to move into medium compression, and then you're getting more aggressive the higher you get on the decibels that you're turning it down, right? Let's balance the makeup gain here. So right now it's louder when the compressor's off, quieter when it's on, so let's bring some makeup gain back in. I think I want to make it just a little bit gentler. Cool. Okay, I'm liking the sound of this. So again, listen to this. This is off. this is on. Right? Now listen in the context of the mix, and what I want you to notice is the moment I turn this compressor off, the drums kind of disappear in the context of the song. So check it out. This is on first, and then we're going to turn it off. And as soon as I turn it back on, notice that the drums are punchier again. They're cutting through more. You just hear them a little bit better. You feel them a little bit more. Right? It's subtle, but there's a definite impact difference and an energy difference, which is maybe more important with those drums. Okay, stick around to the end of this video. I'm going to show you a crazy trick that a lot of the pros use, kind of all the pros use, for making their drums crazy punchy and really, really full in a natural sounding way. It's really cool. We're going to get back to that in just a minute. We're going to go and move on and start with bass now, and then we're going to do vocals, and then we're going to do our guitars, and then we'll come back for that drum trick. So let's look at the bass here. Now here, we're going to use a plugin from Analog Obsession called La La. I really love this on bass, and it's really, really easy to set. This one's even easier than the other one. The other one has a lot of knobs going on. This one, you can ignore all this over here and just focus on these two knobs. So this one is essentially more compression and then makeup gain. That's all you're doing with this compressor. So this is really easy to set. And that's one reason I love these Analog Obsession plugins, is they're way easier to set than something like if I pull up the GarageBand compressor here. I mean, how do you set that? What am I even looking at here, right? I know compression, and I've worked with it for years, and I'm still like, this is not an easy compressor to set. And you don't get the visual meter of how much compression is happening. So that's why these plugins really help fill a gap built into GarageBand, but they fix it, and it's filled as soon as you get this. So, okay, let's listen to this on bass, and let's just dial in a little bit of this compression here. So we can see, if we zoom in on our bass, that some of my notes are a little bit inconsistent here. So it's a little bit quieter there, gets a little bit louder, and you can just see it's ebbing and flowing a little bit. I just want to try to smooth that out all together just a little bit. And this is emulating a plugin that's really great on bass. It's a little bit warm. It's really smooth. It's a little bit slow, but you don't determine the attack time or release time, which makes it even easier to set. So let's just listen to it, dial in a little bit of compression here. Bypass it here. A little more output gain. So notice that the needle just ticks up higher anytime I hit a note a little bit harder. It just smooths it out. So it's going to apply more compression when a note gets hit harder and less compression when a note is hit softer. And then we apply makeup gain. The quieter notes benefit from that makeup gain because they're not turned down as much, so that gain makes them louder, and the louder notes just stay the same. It's great. It's like magic, right? So check this out now in the context of the mix. That's all I'm doing. Let's go to the verse where you can just hear it a little bit better. Check this out. So from the intro into this verse. This is off. This is on. It's subtle, but it's just bringing up and smoothing out all the inconsistencies in the low end, which is going to give you a more consistent, fuller low end of your mix, which is really important if you want your mix to be consistent, right? Okay, so that is compression on a bass. There's a lot of ways that you can approach compression on bass. Overall, this bass is not super dynamic, so that's all I need to do on it, right? Just a little bit. I'm hitting 3 to 4 decibels of gain reduction. I'm using a little over 3 decibels, making that volume back up, and that's smoothing it out, and I like the sound of it. We don't need to question any more than that. Okay, let's look at vocal compression here. And here we're going to use something called the Fetish from Analog Obsession, which is emulating a FET style compressor. Again, it looks very confusing, but we are ignoring all of this here. Now, you'll notice that this doesn't have a threshold, but functionally, at least on this compressor, as you dial up the input, it's kind of like lowering the threshold. And then the output is just our makeup gain. So we have an input here, which we're going to use more or less as a threshold, and then we're using these over here to dial in our tone. Now, on a vocal, my preferred setting, what I always, or 9 times out of 10 am liking, is a slow attack, fast release. Now on this compressor, a slow attack is less than 1 millisecond, so it's still really, really fast. So it's still going to catch that word, but it's going to let the initial part of the word through, and it's going to make it a little bit extra punchy. And so we're going to dial this up until we're getting a fair amount of compression, and it's going to turn down the louder words and bring up the quieter words. And you can see here, there's some louder words and there's some quieter words. So what I am looking for is that on the super quiet words, the quietest words, there should be no gain reduction showing on this meter. And on the louder words, there should be as much as is needed. And then I'm just going to use the output gain to balance out the volume so it's not any quieter.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? My work with a nice apartment, maybe then I'll find a partner. My work with a nice apartment, maybe then. What? Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Okay, so notice that like this dressed, that first word just gets a little bit of compression.
Dressed in my face.
And then fears gets turned down a lot more, but it now sounds fairly consistent. If we listen to this in solo here,
Dressed in my face.
it basically just sounds smooth, like every word is roughly the same volume. So as opposed to dressed in my fears getting kind of lost on that vocal,
Dressed in my face.
it's now heard a lot better.
Dressed in my face.
And we can hear that, I'm sure, in this verse here. Let's go back to the verse for just a second.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
Okay, now listen to that phrase one more time with this compression on, and notice how no words get lost.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
Right? And in general, this part of the vocal is quieter than this later part of the vocal, but now it's all closer in volume because we're compressing the louder parts more, the quieter parts less. We're using makeup gain here to just dial the volume back in, and we get a much smoother vocal. Now, something that can really help on vocals, like this is a really dynamic vocal performance. To make this compressor work a little bit less hard, I'm actually going to add a second fetish compressor right before it. So now I have the one that we just set after one that we just added. So there's two, and we're going to use this other one a little bit differently. We're going to have this one work a little bit faster with as fast as the release can go. So kind of a medium fast attack on here, as fast as the release can go. And I'm just looking for a little bit of compression on here. And the goal here is for this to just tamp down on the loudest words just a little bit more. So let's look at this primarily in the chorus here.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
So I just wanted to hit those loudest words.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Perfect.
Every day we keep racing through space.
And now I'm just going to apply like 1-ish decibels of makeup gain. That's just going to help me make up any gain that was lost from that. And now we're going to have an even smoother vocal.
Every day the universe expands.
So this is turning down just like a half a decibel to 1 decibel, which makes this compressor, the second compressor, have to work just a little bit less. So stacking your compressors, sharing the load between two compressors can really help. Okay, so that is it on lead vocals. The last thing we're talking about with vocals is applying the compression to actually kind of push the backing vocals back just a little bit. So on not these vocals, but let's say these gang vocals here that are really, really punchy in this song. If we listen to this in solo here,
Every day the universe expands.
I want to contain those dynamics a lot, but I also want to kind of push them back. And so by setting a faster attack time, so pulling it closer up here, I'm going to push it back. The same way that when we're working on the drum, the attack time as it got really fast, the drum hit, the initial hit kind of disappeared. If we do something similar in these vocals and make a really fast attack time, the initial hit of those vocals is going to get clamped down, and it's going to push them a little bit further back into the mix. So let me dial the input up so the threshold is being activated. I'm going to set a little bit more aggressive here.
Every day the universe expands.
Cool.
But I'm still stranded here, dressed in my fears.
Let's listen to that one more time.
Every day the
So this is off.
expands. But
Make this
I'm
even
still
faster.
stranded here, dressed in my fears.
Let me set the release. I want the release to be really fast.
Every day the universe expands. But I'm still stranded here,
Cool.
dressed in my fears.
So now those are going to sit a little bit further back in this mix. Okay, so that's it for vocals. Let's look at guitars really quick, and then we'll look at the final little drum trick that I wanted to show you. So with guitars, the more distortion you have, the less compression you need, because distortion automatically compresses it here. But we're going to dial in a little bit, and I'm going to use that speed comp again on these electric guitars. And then we'll also look at acoustic guitars really quick. So speed comp on this electric here. And I tend to really like this 10 millisecond attack time on electric guitars. And this release usually works pretty well for me too. I might speed it up a little bit though. So let's just bring this down until we're just getting a little bit. Just so those big strums are just contained a little bit. I just want to smooth them out so that when you can see it visually here, when I hit it louder in that section than I do in this section, it's not like, you know, too loud over here, too quiet over there. By smoothing it out automatically with this compression, it's just going to sit better in the mix. Now I could overdo it and be way down here. I'm just looking for a little bit though. And I'm liking where this attack is, or this release is. But I'll put it about where the drums were. I bet that will work well. Yeah, so about 150 I think will work well. The attack is letting the initial hit through, but it's going to smooth it down just a little bit. Apply a little bit of makeup gain here.
Dressed in my fears. Every day.
And then I'm going to copy this as a starting point and apply these same settings over here on this amp. And then just make sure, tweak it, make sure I like it on this amp. This is a more distorted guitar sound, so I don't need as much, but I'm also getting less. So I'm going to turn the makeup gain down a little bit, bring the threshold down a little bit. Okay, so that's going to contain the dynamics of those electrics pretty well. Let's listen to the acoustic really quick. And on here, we're going to use that la-la, which if it's not your favorite, it should be because it's just so easy to set. So all I need to do here is dial up peak reduction. Let's listen to this in solo. And all I want to do is have this tick on a little bit on those bigger strums. That's all I'm looking for, just to smooth it out a little bit. But it's a slower attack on this, but you don't set that. It's just automatically a slower attack on here. So it will let the initial hit through a little bit. So we're not going to lose the punch of this acoustic, but we want to just tame it a little bit. You could have a little bit more. Cool. Nice and smooth, and I'm just going to copy, since these acoustics are doing the exact same thing and they're recorded the exact same way, I'm just going to copy that setting and paste it down here. And it looks good there too. And that's just going to smooth out those acoustics so that they're really up front in the mix without being too spiky. Okay, let's finish with that drum trick that I promised you. We're going to take our drums here. We're going to hold Option on the keyboard and drag it down, which is going to duplicate the drum track in every way. I'm going to title this P Comp, and then I'm going to turn off everything except for the kick and the snare here. And I'm going to change out speed comp for our fourth and final compressor from Analog Obsession. This is the Buster SE. If you watch the master track compression video, we did this on there. Okay, so this compressor is awesome. And all I want to do here is just like absolutely crush this drum part. So we're going to set it with a slow attack initially, but I might dial it up a little bit. And I'm going to set the ratio to 10:1, which is the most extreme setting that it can be. That's really going to turn it down aggressively every time it engages. And then we're just going to bring the threshold down. I have the fastest attack time here. I like that. So let's just bring this down. All right. So here that's really letting that initial hit through. It's really snappy. If I turn it off. If I bring it down, you're going to notice we get even more energy out of the drums. If I go slower, it doesn't really affect it too much. This is making it a little bit punchier. And this is going to start to smooth it out, like slam it so those initial hits are just lost compared to that, right? So I think I like 10 on here. 10 milliseconds is the ratio. So let's listen. Let's dial it back. Actually, this is a pretty good sound already. That's really aggressive. And I'm not too worried about making up all of my lost volume here. What I want to do now is just dial this, blend this up into my drum sound. So let's listen to the drums here. I take it away. Add it in. Let's listen in the context of the song and notice when I mute this track how the drums kind of disappear a little bit again, right? So this is taking what we've already, ramped up with a little bit of compression on the whole drum sound and made it even more extreme with parallel compression. So that's what PComp stands for. This is now an extremely compressed track that we're blending in next to our other track, and it's giving us something wild. Check this out. This is on. Blend it up more. Right? So parallel compression, I love that trick on drums. Okay, so let's go back and we're just going to listen to our mix that we exported out. If you saw the video where we set up the master track processing, we exported out our mix before we did any master track processing. So this is just our volumes. And let's listen to the mix from just volumes to now after EQ and compression. Check this out. So this is before with just volume. And then when I unsolo this, it will be the mix now with EQ and compression on it. So. Every day but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place. Every day. So that is compression. You can see now that it's just punchier, it's fuller, it's more consistent, the vocals don't get lost. I'm going to go through all the individual vocals and the last few guitar tracks and do it on this mix, and then I'll see you in the next video where we're going to start getting into effects. Effects like reverb and delay. This is how you create a realistic space inside of your mix, and it's a really crucial part. This isn't something that you should skip. But a lot of people kind of just haphazardly throw on reverb because there's a slider there, so they do it and it sounds better initially, but it doesn't actually help the whole mix. As with everything that we've done, working with intentionality is what's going to take you from just kind of dull, kind of weird mixes to really, really good professional sounding mixes. GarageBand isn't what's holding you back. It's the way you use it that can hold people back. Okay, getting off my little soapbox there. And before we get into today's video, I want to give you something. In addition to this entire video series, I've also put together the Ultimate GarageBand Guide. This guide walks through recording, mixing, mastering, gear you need, shortcuts, everything, and it's completely free from the link in the description below. So be sure to pick it up. It's really going to help you out. It has a whole section on mixing that you can just quickly reference back to anytime you're actually working on your music. And it's just a downloadable guide so you can check it anytime you want. Okay, let's go and get into our video today where we're talking about effects. Now, fundamentally, there's really only two types of effects that you need to be thinking about. Reverb, which is like when you walk into a room and there's just a whole bunch of reverb around you. You hear your voice kind of bouncing around the walls. And the delay is a little bit more specific. So delay would be a specific like repeat of a word. So think if you're at the Grand Canyon, you shout, you hear it come back. Or if you're, the other day I was walking my neighborhood and my dog got really confused because dog started barking and it was bouncing off another wall on the other side of him. And my dog was like, where are there two dogs here? What's going on, right? So that is delay when it's bouncing off something and you hear a very specific bark coming back to you. So that's delay. So we can use these two tools to kind of shape space around our mix. Now, as opposed to just slapping it on all over the place, I definitely encourage you to think less is more and that effects are better felt, not heard. You often don't necessarily need to specifically hear it, but just blending it in an intentional way can give you a much fuller sounding mix. So we're going to focus really just on two places in our mix. We're going to focus on our snare drum and our lead vocal. And those are the only two places that we're going to put effects in this mix. Now, I will go ahead and caveat that and just say that these amps here that I built in GarageBand Amp Designer, I did use a little bit. You can see right under 1% mix, or 1 on the 10% knob there. It looks like 2 on this knob. Just a little bit on there. So you can hear when I stop this guitar. There's a little bit of reverb on those. But that's just a little bit. And I would encourage you, I like to play around with those reverbs and see if they work on your song. But if you're working like a heavy metal song or something like that, do not put reverb on your amps. You need to have like the definition in between notes. So just an aside. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with the drums and start with the reverb on the snare drum. So I'm going to duplicate this track by holding Option and clicking and dragging it down. And it's going to give me a fresh version of this track. And I'm going to title this Snare Verb. And then we're going to turn off everything except the snare drum over here. So now this track is just the snare track. So I've just isolated the snare track in 1 second. And now we're just going to go down to reverb here and pull up the Space Designer. This is definitely my go-to for drum sounds. Now, I actually like 2 reverbs on a snare drum. I like to have a real short reverb that's just kind of filling in the body of the snare sound, and then a longer reverb that's adding a little bit more of a tail to the snare drum. So let's start with that really short room style reverb. Now, you can see here, there's only a few options. There's rooms, halls, plate reverbs, spring reverbs, and then we just get into kind of specific spaces. And then generally speaking, there's only these 3 types of spaces. These last 3 down here are just weird effect things that are fun if you're just playing around. But for most mixing, you want to focus on small, medium, or large spaces, and you're looking at rooms, halls, plates, and springs. So those are the only variables that you should be going through. That's already a lot of options. So first, I just want to have a really small room reverb, and I'm just trying to create a small sense of space around the snare drum. And this is what I love about reverbs is you don't necessarily have to know anything other than just try to find things that you like. And so I'm just going to try this snare chamber here. Let me see if this does what I want it to do. Yep. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, now, as opposed to just leaving it like this, you have a dry output and a reverb output. We just want this track here to be a reverb output. So here what I'm setting up is a parallel track. So this reverb, the snare verb track can just be blended in and it will only be reverb. So I don't need any of the dry snare signal on this. And now I'm just going to bring this down. We're going to solo our drums here and I'm just going to mix it up into the drums. So really loud. I want to get this till I just start to notice it and then turn it back just a little bit. And if I turn it off, notice how the snare feels a little fuller when this is in. If I turn it off, right? So that's my first snare reverb. We're going to hold Option, click and drag this down again. Now we're going to create a second snare reverb, and I'm going to unsolo everything but this one. I'm going to title this Snare Verb Long. And here, what I want to do is have a brighter, longer reverb that extends the tail of the snare drum. So the first one was adding to the body of the snare drum. The second one is going to extend the tail of the snare drum. So we're going down here to Space Designer. I'm going to go, and what will be best for this is a medium or large plate reverb. So I'm going to go down here, and let's just try this drum plate. the volume up a little bit here. I like that, but let's try one other option. Let's try a small plate and see if there's one on the longer side in the small options here. Let's try this golden vocals. That sounds better. Okay. Cool. Okay, so now what we need to do is just blend it up in. So I first hear it, then turn it down just a little bit. So this is off, this is on. Let's listen in the verse here and make sure we like this in this other section of the song.
All day long I get no work done. All day long I get what have I done? Prove my worth for now.
Okay, we're gonna do one more thing, and because what's cool is that this is its own track, so if I want to change the tone of it, I can. So let's listen to this one in solo. I want to bring out more high end on this track. So this is the longer reverb. So I just went to my EQ on that, and I'm adding more high end into it. Now let's listen to this. If I turn that off. Helps just a little bit. Okay, so now we have the drums dialed in. Let's go to our vocals. And with vocals, there's three effects that I want to dial in. I want to dial in a time delay. I want to dial in a slapback reverb that's stereo. And then I want to dial in just a little bit of reverb. So we're going to start with the slapback delay. I'm going to hold Option and click and drag this down. And then on here, we're just going to add delay here, stereo delay. And the idea here is that we're just going to do a super fast slapback delay, meaning that it's basically like right after he says it, it's like bouncing off the walls in a small room. And so we're going to set this to the fastest time on both of these sides. I'm going to take the left mix to 100, the right mix to 100, and then feedback down. Let's just go all the way to 0. Feedback is how many times it repeats. So if we listen to this now, and we're going to title this over here, Stereo Slap. If you listen to this now,
Every day the
doesn't sound like anything, but we put it with our lead vocal.
expands, but I'm still standing there.
It's like a really fast slapback. So now what I like to do is use the deviation here to offset the left and the right ears.
Dressed in my face.
Okay, that's cool now, right?
Every day we keep racing through space.
And then I like to use down here, you have high cut, low cut, right? So this would be like filtering, cutting out high frequencies and low frequencies on each side. I like to cut out some of the high frequencies.
But every day the universe expands.
And some of the low frequencies.
But I'm still standing there.
And give it kind of this warm sound. If we listen to this in solo.
Every day we keep racing through space.
So now what we can do is take this and blend it up into our vocal.
But I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place.
All right, let's listen in the context of the mix and dial it in here. And let's start in this verse, actually.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one. All day long I get no work done. All day long I get what have I done?
So I love this because it just sounds like a really, really small space, but it's very contained sounding, and it adds a lot of warmth to this vocal.
Lost my last job,
If I turn it off,
lose this one. All day long I get no work done.
Back
All
on.
day long I get what have I done?
right? Subtle, but it definitely helps fill out that vocal. It takes it from kind of a lonely vocal to a slightly fuller, wider vocal. All right, we're going to hold Option, click, and drag this down again. I'm also going to go ahead and change the color of these just so I can tell them apart really quickly. And we're going to call this one timed delay. And here I'm just going to change the stereo delay for a tape delay. And I just want a quarter delay, so it already is defaulted on the right one. Let's listen to this in solo. Cool. Sounds great. I'm going to filter it with the low cut, high cut just a little bit. And then I'm going to take the dry down to 0, wet up to 100. And now this track again is a parallel just delay track that I can blend in. So let's listen to this here.
But I'm still standing there. dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space. But
Cool. And then what I like about parallel tracks is now I can also get crazy with this and like, let's try distorting it a little bit. So let's run this through a pedal board.
every day the
Let's throw, I really like this grit. Let's throw this grit on it. This is just a distortion pedal.
every day the universe expands. But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
That's pretty cool.
Every day we keep racing through space. But I'm so stuck in place.
Okay.
So stuck in place.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so now let's blend it up in. It's a little bit loud right now.
Every day the universe expands.
Let's do this in the context of the mix. Let's start in this verse
It's
here.
my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? My work at the nice apartment, maybe there up.
Cool. Let's listen in the chorus.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place.
Okay, I dig it. Okay, so we can automate both of those up and down when we get to automation, which is the next video. But for now, we're just going to get kind of like the generally good level. And then we're going to do one more, and this is going to be a reverb. So I'm holding Option and clicking and dragging this down again. I'm changing this out and titling it Reverb. And we're going to take off the delay and change it out for that Space Designer. And we're going to take off the pedal board. Okay, so now we have a reverb track here. Let's go and bring the volume up here.
Every day the universe expands.
And honestly, that's a good reverb right off the bat. Just the default setting. I like it a lot. Let's try something a little bit smaller, though. And let's try a plate. So let's try vocal ambience. What does this sound like?
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
I kind of like that. What does that sound like in the mix?
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here.
Is this in the verse here?
Every day, lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
I don't know. How do you feel about that reverb? Let me know in the comments. I think I like it. Let's try one more. So right now we're on this vocal ambience. Let's bring this up here and let's listen to one other. I like it. There's something kind of cool, like small room about it. Let's try bright plate.
Can't lose this one all day long.
It's
I
really
get
bright.
no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
It sounds nice.
Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work
I like the sound of that, but I feel like it's going to make my vocal sound muddy. It's like, I don't know, muddy sounding. I actually think that this little vocal ambience,
done all day long.
let's just compare this to one more here. Let's try it against the drum plate.
I get what have I done?
That's cool too. Let's do one more here just because I noticed. Let's try bright vocals and just see what we think.
Can't lose this one all day
It's too
long.
bright.
I get no work done all day long.
All right, I like
get what have I
ambience
done?
best. That one's good too, though. Let's do
Prove my
ambience, vocal
worth with
ambience.
a nice apartment, maybe.
There's something cool about that. Okay, let's just mix it in and find the right spot for it.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? Prove my worth with a nice apartment, maybe.
Cool. That's it. Okay, so subtle things, but let's just listen to this mix. If I just take off these three effects that we set up and then the two on the drums, and then I'm going to add them on. Let's start in the verse here and check it out.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? Prove my worth with a nice apartment, maybe there I found a partner. Prove my worth with a nice apartment, maybe there. What? Every day the
cool, right? It's all subtle stuff, but you can tell that it just adds together to give us a little bit more realistic space in our mix, and we're not clouding it at all. The biggest concern, the biggest and worst thing you can do is just pile on reverb and just create a cloudy, muddy mess of a mix. By doing little bits of effects, but doing them very intentionally, you can absolutely dial in a realistic space while not overdoing it. Okay, the last thing I want us to do in this video is just check again really quickly against our static mix. This is our mix of volume only. Now we've gone through the master track processing, EQ, compression, and effects. Let's listen to our mix before and after. So this is just volumes, and then when I turn off solo, it will be everything all together. Check it out.
Every day that you persist, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Right? It's a pretty big difference. And it's just subtle stuff that just adds together. You got to trust the process, and you got to do small little incremental changes across the way, but it all adds up to a much fuller, much wider, much more cohesive sounding final product. Okay, so that is effects. Be sure to grab the Ultimate GarageBand guide from the link in the description below. It's really going to help you out. If this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. But for now, let's go ahead and move on to the sixth and final step of the mixing process, automation. Automation is such a powerful tool. Automation is like having a bunch of little interns running around inside GarageBand, turning things up and down for you where you want them to come up or come down, or pan off to the left or pan off to the right, or kick on a guitar pedal for you. Whatever you need to have happen, you can program that to happen at the exact right moment in GarageBand. And what's cool is that if you mess it up, you just tweak it and get it right, or you just take it off. No harm, no foul. As opposed to back in the old analog days, if you needed to have a bunch of things be turned up or turned down or pan off to the side, if you needed to do more than you could physically do, you'd have to have other people help you with it, and you were printing to tape, so if you mess it up, you either had to roll with it or you had to redo it and you lose that on that tape. In GarageBand, you don't have any of that. You can just play around with it. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. And you can tweak it if it's not right and get it to be exactly what you want it to be. So it's particularly great for learning all these little variables. Now, I will say before we even get into it, one of the biggest mistakes I see early mixers make is that they automate way too early. I know I did this, where you automate like first thing. You're like, that vocal is way too loud here and way too quiet here. Let me automate it. Don't automate it. Address a lot of those things with compression. And so you want to save automation till the very, very end of the mixing process to just fine tune things so that it's really working for you. Now, you can automate just about anything. So for example, let's look in GarageBand here. I have already automated before even starting here. I'm breaking my own rule, but this was more for like a recording purpose. I've automated to have a guitar pedal kick on at a specific point in the song. So for example, this guitar here has a strumming part, and then it goes into a lead guitar line. And if we bring up this pedal board, you'll see that this EQ and this octave pedal kick on when it goes to this guitar line right here. And that's because I didn't want to have these pedals on during these chords, but I want to have them kick on right there. So that gives me like a boost. I'm just doing a boost with this EQ and an octave when it's doing that lead line. That's really helpful. That's automation too, but that's automation kind of in the recording phase. So I set that up when we were still working on the song before, but I have not done, as you can see as I go through here, any sort of automation in terms of volume or anything like that in this. Save that for now. And as I said, you can do just about anything. So we see it on a guitar pedal there. But when you're just starting out, I'd highly recommend you pay attention to really just three things, and maybe kind of a fourth. Your lead vocal automation. So can you hear every single word like you want to on the lead vocal? Compression is going to get you 80, 90%, sometimes 100% of the way there. But you might need to do a little bit of fine tuning. The second would be your effect automation. So do you want some effects to come up in some sections and down in other sections? And then your third is any sort of pan automation. Your fourth is any sort of volume automation on anything else. Just use that to your discretion. And then we're going to close out with one bonus one here for you as well. Now, there's two ways you can approach setting your automation. You can either go source by source, meaning that I would go through the entire song and just listen to what the drums need throughout the entire song. And then I go through all of the percussion, and then all the bass, and then all the guitars, and then all the vocals. or you can go section by section. So in today's video, what we're going to do is we're going to go section by section and just listen through what we need. So let's go ahead and get into it. And we're going to start by just listening in this intro here and determine, is everything at the right level? So we know that I've set the volumes where I think they're best across the entire mix, but maybe there's some things I want to tweak in the individual sections. So let's just start right here in this intro and see if there's anything we want to come up or down. Okay, so there's one thing that's kind of rubbing me the wrong way in this intro, and it's the grit track on these drums. So this is just a cool little textural element that I like when the full drums are playing. Just adds a lot of energy to the drum sound. But in this intro where it's so light, it's just a little bit too loud. I think it's at a good level everywhere else. So what I want to do is just bring this volume down just a little bit during this section, and then I'll have it pump up back on where it does this little fill at the end. So do that, do that, do. So we just have to have the volume come down leading into that. And let's find this level while listening to it. So let me set this here. All right, let's listen. I'm also going to go ahead and pump up the parallel compression on that drum fill, which will just make that drum fill hit a little bit harder. So the parallel compression is this like crazy track, and we're just going to have it add energy to that fill right there. Let's listen here. Very subtle, but it helps those drums just punch through a little bit better. Okay, let's listen through this section here. I think that lead line could come up a little bit right through that intro. Let's go to the volume here. And let's just turn this up a little bit. Now, if you hold control on the keyboard while you pull it up, it will go into fine control, which just makes the movement a lot smaller. If I don't select that, then it moves really quickly. So hold control and that will give you fine control. All right, let's listen to that. It's too much.
Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? Lost my last job. Can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done?
Cool. I'm good with all that.
My work with a nice apartment. Maybe then I'll find a partner. My work with a nice apartment.
That maybe then gets a little bit lost. Yeah, let's bring that up just a little bit. So we're on the lead vocal here. Just doing a little bit of automation here. Bring that up here. Let's listen. I'm going to have it get a little louder as it goes. I'm also going to have it start a little bit quieter. Let's listen to this. I want this word to be up a little bit more. Holding control to make it fine control. Let's listen to this whole line right here.
What?
And then I think there's one prove right here. I think that prove is just a little bit quiet. Let's bring that up just a little bit. Just a little bit more. Cool.
What? Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place.
So I think I'm good with all those vocals. There's one thing I want to make sure I get coming out of this pre-chorus. I think this drum fill, I want to turn up the parallel compression. So again, just a little bit of extra automation on other things volume just to get them really sitting right in the mix.
What?
Cool.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here,
This.
dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
I think I want that lead guitar line to come up just a little bit more to this line. So let's just have that come up, hit A here. And I'm going to have it come up just for this little lead line section. So hold control here. Let's bring this up. Let's listen to that.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this.
Cool.
So stuck in this.
Let's have that fill do the same thing again. Dat. I'm just going to have it go through that whole section right there. And then I'm going to have the parallel compression come up on that drum fill. Dat. So we're just going to have this automate up just a little bit. Listen to that in solo here. A little bit more. I think that might be a little bit too hot. Let's try this one more time. Cool. Okay. So I think that's good in terms of the volumes. The only other thing I want to pay attention to here is the effects. So this is a pretty straightforward song. I'm not doing any pan automation here, but I want to see if these effects can come up when I get to this chorus here. So they're set pretty well in this verse level.
My last job, can't lose this one. Get no work done.
But I bet when we get to this chorus, they can come up a little bit.
Every day
So I'm just going to use the volume on these to bring them up just a little bit. The slap just a little bit. And then this time delay just a little bit. Let's listen in the context of the song as we set these last two here.
the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this.
Listen to that one more time.
Say the universe expands, but I'm still standing here,
Cool.
dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this.
Okay. Feel really good about that. I think we're accomplishing everything we need to here. We're just turning things up just that last little bit, the last 5-10% to help it really sit at the right volume at every point in the song. We're turning our effects up when we need to, and we're just adding a little bit more interest and a little bit more fine-tuning to get this exactly where we want it to be. Okay, so that's automation. Now, there's one more thing I want to share with you since we're wrapping up our mix in this video, and that's how to export out your song so that it's loud enough to listen to on your car stereo or on your AirPods or Bluetooth speaker, or wherever else you want to listen to outside of GarageBand. So here, you just need to go to your master track. So I'm just on any of my tracks on the Smart Control window, click over to my master. And here, I just want to set on my very last plugin, go under Dynamics and set a limiter. Now, what a limiter is going to do is it's going to set a brick wall before the point where your mix is going to digitally distort. So at digital 0, your mix is just going to digitally distort. It's going to stop it, but then you can push the volume of your mix up into it, turning up the volume without getting that digital distortion. So we need to set the output level here to -1. And then we can just turn the gain up here, and we just want to be listening that we're not getting any adverse effects here. So this is going to get louder in your ears as well, and you'll also see on this meter up here that it's going to start hitting red, but that's fine because this limiter is going to protect it from actually digitally distorting. It's showing red because it's really, really close to the top, but as long as you have a limiter set as the last plugin on your master track, it's not going to be getting too loud. So let's do this in the louder section of the song here.
Universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
So I noticed as I started to get louder there that I was starting to feel like a little bit of pumping from it, and that's what you want to listen for, is it starting to sound a little bit weird. So pay attention to that, but you can add 6 to 10 decibels on most songs if you've been following my mixing process here without having too much of an issue with pumping or things like that. And in the next couple of videos after this, as we move into mastering, that's where we're going to safely turn up the volume to be really, really loud. But this is going to get you loud enough to now go listen to it in your car. The last thing that you want to do after you've done that is set your cycle region just to the length of your song. So make sure, you know, you hear the very end of your song here. And you get any tail, which, by the way, if you need to fade out, if you hold Shift Command M on the keyboard, you'll see your master track here, hit automation, and then here we can pull up volume and do a fade out. So right there at the end, I can have this fade out right after that last hit. And you can just use a pen to draw it in if you want. And listen to this now. Cool, right? Okay, so then I just want the cycle region to, you know, end right where that ends. So that's, pull that one note. And then we want to go to the very beginning of our song here. And I just want to set it to start right before the very start, which for me is on bar 3. Cool. And now we go up to share, export song to disk. And if I'm just listening to my song in my car or something, then I will just export it as an MP3 and select export cycle area and title your track. And then you can send it to yourself, listen to it in your car, however you want, Bluetooth, all that good stuff. And then you might need to go through a couple rounds of revisions once you're hearing it on other systems. That's very, very common. Don't be discouraged. It's very common after you finish your first mix. Even though I've been mixing for years, I'll still hear some things when I listen to it in other places. Over time, you'll get better and more comfortable with mixing. You'll have less and less of that. But it's an important step to take it and listen on other systems before you go through the mastering process. So go ahead and do that. Do a couple rounds of revisions. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed with it, and focus on the best that you can do right now and not worrying about it being perfect. There's never going to be a perfect mix. I've never done a perfect mix. I don't know anyone who's done a perfect mix. Well, maybe some of the pros have, but most people can't do a perfect mix, and partly you can't because mixing is subjective. There's things that I like the sound of that you might not like the sound of. So there's no such thing as a perfect mix. But as long as you're intentionally taking the time to just incrementally improve it, you can get a great mix, which is what we're really going for here. Okay, so go through the automation process, set that limiter on your master track to bring up the volume, take it and listen to it in a car a few times or wherever you like to listen to music, and then do a couple rounds of revisions, and then I'll see you back in the next video where we're going to be mastering this, and that's where we're really making it loud and bringing it up to commercial standards. But before we start actually mastering, we need to do part 8, which is to create a dedicated mastering session. Now, mastering is really important. This is the final step in the music production process. This is where we are taking the song that we spent so long recording and mixing and bringing it up to commercial volume and making sure that the tone works across our project. So if we have multiple songs together or up against other commercial releases. This is really, really crucial. But a lot of people either skip this step altogether or they don't take the time to set up a dedicated mastering session, which is what we're going to talk about in today's video. Setting up a session is really, really important for 2 reasons. One, because you need to shift your focus from your recording and mixing hat to your mastering engineer hat. You need to pretend like you're sending this off to a mastering engineer just like you would be if you were a pro who's been doing this for 50 years. This is still a step in the process, even if it's you doing it at home. Even if you're sending it off just back to yourself, you need to transition from that recording and mixing mindset into a mastering mindset and focus on the goals of mastering and mastering alone. So that is the first reason. The second reason is that setting up a distinct mastering session is going to help us get a better final product, especially if we're working on multiple projects or just in general, which you'll see as we go through this process. So first things first, we need to export out our finished song. So once you finish mixing your song, you do a few mix revisions if you need to, and then we're going to export it out to bring it into the distinct mastering session. So first things first, if you haven't set your cycle region to the exact length of the song, be sure to do that. That way you've cut off any unnecessary time at the beginning and or end of the song. And then we're going to go up to share, export song to disk, and here you want to pay attention to where it is you're actually saving it. And we want to select wave. We want to do the highest quality that we can do here. You want to select uncompressed 24-bit and then export cycle area or length of cycle selected regions, all that. That's just saying that it's going to only export out the length that we've selected in our cycle region. And then we want to name it, so we're just going to call this stranded and expanded mix 1B and export that out. Okay, so now that is exported out, we're going to create a new session. So just go up to File, New, and we're just going to save this, create an empty project here. And then I just start with an audio track, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to be customizing it anyway. So now that we have that, we want to bring in the song that we exported out here. So pay attention to where you actually save it and how you title it. And now we're going to bring that into this session. You can just drag and drop it in. And we're going to title this Mastered. And then we're going to delete this other track because we don't need it. And we're going to hold Option and click and drag this down. And we're going to rename this one on the top Unmastered. You'll see why that's important in the next video, but getting this set up now is just quick and easy. Okay, I'm going to hit Y to close off my library on the side. So this session is going to have two distinct sections. We're going to have the processing that we're applying on this actual track for the mastering, and then we're also going to have a second section on our master track, which is where we're going to be metering it, which is how we're seeing how loud we're actually making it, what we're doing as we're mastering, if that makes sense. So our processing is going to be on the individual track, and then our metering to see how loud it is going to be on our master track. So first things first, we're just going to take off everything on both of those places here. I'm just going to undo all the plugins that GarageBand pre-populates onto here. And then we're going to bring up two plugins on our master track. First, we're going to bring up under TB Pro Audio, MV Meter 2. Now, you do have to download this. It's completely free. I'll link to it in the description below. We've been using it if you've been following along in the series. But if you don't already have it, you can grab it for free from TB Pro Audio. And we're going to set this under factory presets here to RMS standard. You can also, if you click on the little three lines right here, you can go down to factory RMS standard, or if you click right here, you can just select RMS. So that's all we're going to set up on this track here. And then we're going to bring up another plugin, and I have not mentioned this one yet on this channel. This is the Uling Loudness Meter 2. This is really just serving one purpose, and that is monitoring our LUFS value, which is the new level that every streaming platform and everybody is looking for. It's kind of become the industry standard for mastering volume. So we're not going to use that yet, but just so you know, that's what this plugin is for. Again, I'll link to it in the description below. It is free, so be sure to grab it. Okay, so that is our metering. We have two meters here. We have an RMS meter that's going to show our average volume over a short period of time, and then we have our Uling loudness meter, which is going to show our LUFS. And now we're going to set up the processing that we're going to be doing on the individual track here that's actually going to be applying the mastering. So the way this flows is this is our song here. It's going to go down through these plugins and then from there out through the master over here. So on here, we need to have an EQ, and then we also need to have Buster SE, which is a bus compressor. You could use another compressor if you want. This has become my go-to for mixing and mastering a lot of the time. It's completely free from Analog Obsession. I'll link to it below. If you can support them on Patreon, definitely do, but they want you to have their plugins for free either way. So definitely grab it. This is called Buster SE. It's my go-to for mixing and mastering. And then we're going to use just the stock GarageBand limiter. And we're going to go ahead and just turn that off and Buster SE off. And when we start actually applying our mastering processing, we are going to start with this EQ here. Okay, so that is how you set up a mastering session. You're going to be doing the processing on the individual track, and then that is going to run through the metering on your master track, so you can keep an eye on that at different points as you're working on your song. Now, why do I set it up this way? I set it up this way for two reasons. First of all, again, I'm putting on that different hat. I'm setting up my mastering engineer hat. This is the way pro engineers set up their mastering sessions. So just by setting it up and taking it seriously like a pro, it's going to help me out. But two, if I'm actually working on multiple songs, I can put all of them in here. So let's just pretend like these are a whole bunch of different songs here. And I'll just drag this down here. Let's just say I have 3 songs on this little short EP. Well, now I can have them laid out. If we zoom out here, I can pull this so that I can lay them in the order that they would be on the actual EP. So I can listen to them and how the transitions happen between the different sections. So how does this song go into this next song and how does the tone of each of those and the volume of each of those compare. So now I can add individual processing to each of these 3 tracks, and all of that's going to run through metering in one place. So instead of having to have metering on each individual track, I just have it all on my master track. So I only have to set up one RMS meter and one LUFS meter, and I can look at the same volume for each of these. So if we just look at this for a second here, let me turn off the metronome. I can see it on this track, but then when I go over to this track here, I can also see it on my meter over here. So that way you just have metering on one place, but you can apply individual processing to each of these tracks and really get it tailored to the individual tracks. So across your project, it's going to sound great. If you're really just working on one track, you can put your meters on this same individual track processing and just bypass them when you're done with them. But in my opinion, it's better to always have the same exact process and workflow that you follow, whether you're working on one song or multiple. That way you just get very familiar and accustomed to it. Oh, and why do we have this unmastered track here? Well, we have that for comparison because the mastering process, we're going to be processing our song to master it, and we want to make sure that we're not actually making it worse. And so by having this unmastered track here, you'll see how we use it in tomorrow's video. That is just a quick reference point to make sure that we're not making our song sound worse with the mastering processing that we're doing. It's totally possible to take a great mix and make it sound terrible with a bad master. So by setting it up that way, it's just a quick reference point. You'll see how we actually use it in tomorrow's video. Okay, and as always, I'd love to hear from you. Have you been setting up a distinct mastering session for your mastering process? Let me know in the comments below. If not, are you going to try this next time you go to master? Let me know. Okay, it's finally time to move on to our final step, which is mastering. Now, mastering, I think a lot of people miss or they get confused with mixing, and I get it because there is a lot of overlap. I was confused by this for a long time. Ultimately, mixing and mastering are 2 separate functions. They overlap in some of the tools they use, but you have different goals. In mixing, you're making your song work together. All the individual tracks, your guitar, your bass, your drums, whatever, work together in that one individual track, so blending those together. And then in mastering, you're taking that finished mix and you're bringing it up to commercial volume and you're balancing the tone across either other songs that you've released against other commercial releases, or if you're working on a project that has multiple songs, making sure that the tone of all those songs next to each other works really, really well together. So they are 2 distinct processes, and because of that, you should treat it separate from the recording and mixing process. And in that process, you're really focusing on 3 things: the tone, the dynamics, and then making it loud, which is something I'm sure we're all looking for. If you've been frustrated when you take your song out of GarageBand, you try to play it on Bluetooth or on headphones or in your car and it's super quiet, that's because it's not mastered yet. So we're going to jump in and look at this inside GarageBand, but first I just want to really quickly walk through the idea of what it means to make something loud, because I think a lot of people get confused by this. So there is a point that's called digital 0 that you can't go past in your computer. That is the top loudest point, period. No one can go past it. Pro engineers can't go past it. You can't go past it. So that is the loudest point that we can get to. So where our song is actually quiet has nothing to do with anything relative to just like pushing it up to some unknown level. The fact is this level exists for everybody. The secret is containing the dynamics of our song. So if our song is super dynamic and has this super wide dynamic range, then the bulk of our song is going to live kind of down in this range. Whereas a pro mix and mastered song, they're going to do really, really subtle things throughout the mixing and mastering process to shave off some of the dynamics in a way that sounds good and bring that mix way up so that it's louder. Because if you hear a song up towards here, where the bulk of the song is up towards here, it's going to sound louder than a song that's way down here, right? Now you can overdo this and smash your mix up against the top and it's going to seem loud because it's all the way up near the loudest point that it could possibly be, but you are losing all of your dynamics. So you constantly are working this battle of containing the dynamics in a way that is letting you get more volume out of it, but also not completely squashing it into just like a thin little weird sounding mix. I know Metallica's gotten a lot of hate over the years for just absolutely destroying their masters. And this is something to do with the loudness wars. We can't really get into that in this video, but if you're interested, definitely look up the loudness wars online. But my goal for you is to be thinking through, always balancing the idea of loudness and dynamics. You don't want to make your song sound worse just because you're trying to get it loud. And there's been a pushback on that over time where you will start to see modern releases that aren't as loud as previous releases from that same artist. There's a band called Bleachers that I love. I really, really respect them. They have some songs that are mastered super, super loud. I mean, like -6 LUFS, which you'll see LUFS here in a second. And they've been slowly walking that back, and their newest record is mastered at a much more conservative level and has way more dynamic range because of that. So just something to know as we're getting into that. We're going to try to explain as best as we can in the session. Speaking of, let's go and dive into this session here. And you'll see, the first thing I want to point out is you see all these little peaks. If I zoom in here, you can see them a little bit better. Those peaks are the dynamics, and those points, they're short, so we don't hear them particularly well. So by trimming them down a little bit in the dynamic controlling process, we can get more loudness out of our song, and our song will sound bigger and fuller. Okay, so first things first, we are breaking this out into 3 parts: tone, controlling the dynamics, and making it loud. And the way we make it loud also is contain the dynamics. You'll see that in a second. And we are starting with tone, and we're going to do that with just EQ. When we get to making it loud, that's when things like the meters that we set up on our master meter over here are going to be important, right? But when we're just focusing on tone, that doesn't really matter. Again, if you haven't seen the video on setting up this session, definitely go check that out. But in short, the way we've set up our session is that we have the song that we're mastering here, then we have the processing on that song under the track here, and then on the master over here, we are looking at the loudness when we get to that stage. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in and start dialing in the tone. Now, there are way more steps that you can do in the mastering process, but these 3 are the fundamental 3 that all masters have for the most part, and are the 3 that you should focus on early on. Over time, slowly you can consider working in some more advanced techniques, but generally speaking, just start with these 3 and they can get you what you need in the mastering process. So first we're going to focus on tone. Now with tone, you want to cue your ears into other professional mixes and other mixes that you've done to get a sense of what your mix might need. So listen to those. I can't show that on this channel because copyright and all that stuff. So keep that in mind, and let's go ahead and just listen through our song here and determine what we think tonally we might need. And we're going to dial in just a little bit more of that with EQ here. So let's just go back to kind of this intro area.
Lost my last job, can't lose this one. All day long I get no work done. All day long I get, what have I done?
Okay, so the first thing that I hear is that I think I want to bring out a little bit more bite and a little bit more presence in the upper mid-range. Maybe try to bring out a little bit more sheen in the brighter frequencies, see if I can get it just sounding a little bit higher fidelity. And then I think there's a little bit more low end and like warmth in that area that I want to try to bring out as well too. And then maybe we'll look at bringing in a little bit more just general low end as well. But let's go ahead and start with just bringing in that bite that's going to be more in the presence range. So let's see if we can find that. Generally, it's going to be somewhere around here. And you just want to sweep in the range where you think it might be, because not all of these sections across this EQ are equal. But we want to be thinking in the range, where can we find, and then sweep within that until you hear something that's just working for you. Trust your ears. If you like it, then it's good, right? And once we find that, then we're going to dial it back to 1 to maybe 3 decibels. But generally speaking, in mastering, we're going super, super subtle here. So 1, maybe 2 decibels is generally where I'm starting. But let's try to find that frequency range first.
What?
I think somewhere around here, maybe.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here.
Okay, I'm gonna make it a little bit narrower. You can adjust your Q down here. This will make it wider if it's a lower Q, tighter if it's a narrower or higher number Q. I'm just going to try to find the sweet spot. And if you're working on a newer GarageBand, you can also do that with these points right here. I'm just going to try to find a sweet spot where I'm getting what I want, but not more than I want.
Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this.
Cool. Okay. That's working pretty well for me. Let's go ahead and try to dial in just a little bit more of that high fidelity sheen. That's going to be up in this like super bright area range. And I'm going to do this with a bell. You could do this with a shelf, which is going to be everything from here and above. I think I just want to do this with a bell. So I'm going to use this point here. Let's see if we can find this sound. I think somewhere way up there is working for me. And we're just going to do a gentle slope up to it. And again, just like 1 to 2 decibels. Let's see if we can find it here.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
Cool. It's subtle, but it's already bringing out a little bit more, just higher fidelity, sheen, and tone to this song. And then this is cutting through a little bit more with that like 1.5K. Okay, let's pay attention now into the warmer low end area, which we're going to find down in this region.
But I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this.
So it starts to sound like almost muddy right up here for me. But I think I was over something that was feeling pretty good around here.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space. But I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this.
Somewhere around there. Okay, cool.
But I'm still standing here, dressed.
And let's just see about just a little bit more sub. Ooh, threw that off there. Let's put that back where it was. A little bit more sub with this low shelf here.
Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space. But I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this.
Cool. Okay. So really, really subtle. You might have already noticed there's a pretty big difference though. The last thing we need to do though, just to make sure we like what we've done, is balance the output volume here. So because we've done all boosts, I'm just going to turn this down a little bit on this output volume
Universe expands.
until it sounds like it's the same volume off and on. Okay, let's listen to this off and on and notice that there's just this subtle tonal shift here.
But I'm still standing here,
Stop.
dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space. But I'm so stuck in this.
It's subtle, but it definitely pushes us in the direction that we want. And you want to be doing that in this mastering stage. You're not trying to fix things. You're just trying to push yourself in the direction that you want. Okay, so now that we've gotten our tone right, let's just tame the dynamics a little bit more. And we're going to do that with Buster SE here. Now, if you haven't seen my video where I break down compression a little bit more generally, I'll link to that above here. In general here, though, we're just going for a little bit of very, very subtle containment of the song. So we want a really, really low ratio. So 1.5 to maybe 2 to 1. So either of these first two options here. And then we want generally a really slow attack time so we can let the punch of the drums through but contain them a little bit. And then generally a slower-ish release time so that it's kind of moving in time with the song. I will generally play around with this, and I actually kind of like auto a lot of the time on mastering, but we'll just play around with it and find what we like. And then you're just using your threshold to get the right amount of compression and then makeup gain to make up any volume that you're losing. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this initially in the louder part of the song, but then we also want to check in these quieter sections of the song, like this verse over here as well. But let's start in this louder section, this chorus here.
Every day the universe expands.
I'm going to go ahead and dial it up to 2 to 1. If you're working on a really, really light song, starting at 1.5 to 1 is good, but we'll do 2 to 1 since this is a pretty rock song.
Every day the universe expands. But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
So what I'm watching here is this meter, and I want to see that I'm getting a little bit of compression. In general, we're going to end with this hitting somewhere around 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction, which is what we're seeing on this meter, or even a little bit less, sometimes 1 to 2 decibels of gain reduction. So just kissing the meter, if you will. But we can start with it a little bit more aggressive while we're dialing in our attack and release time. So we'll get a little bit more aggressive here.
Every day the universe expands. But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
So notice that this feels a little bit choked, like it wants to get louder, but it can't.
Universe expands.
That is an example of over compression. We do not want that. This is really, really compressed here.
But I'm still standing here,
So what we want to do is find kind of where we're hearing it, but it's not way overdone.
dressed in my face.
And now listen as I bring this attack time back at how much it changes the tone of the song. Generally speaking, with mastering, 30 milliseconds is actually on the shorter side for mastering, but I found that I typically like it on rock music as well, but you rarely are going to be using anything in these super fast ranges. But listen as I bring this to super fast, how much it impacts the drums in particular. Right? What I want is to let those drums breathe, but I want to just contain them a little bit. So somewhere around 30 milliseconds, I think is the right attack time for me compared to just feels more natural, right? Okay, so we're in a good place there. Let's go and dial in the release time here. So this is a fairly fast song, and so for me, I think a slightly faster release is working pretty well for me. So let's go and just dial in and pick between probably this one and this one for our release time. Pay attention to the drums, and when I move to this, notice that they feel like they're kind of a little bit too contained by this compression. I'll make it a little bit more extreme here so you can hear it. Listen to like the snare drum hit, and pay attention to that. So that seems to be working pretty well for me. So I'm going to leave it here, 30 milliseconds and 0.3, and then we're just going to bring our threshold down until we're getting the right amount of compression, which again, we're just kissing it, maybe 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction. But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this. Cool. Okay, let's listen in a quieter section here. All day long, I get no work done. All day long, so this is off. What have I done? Cool. Okay, I'm digging that. All right, so now we have shaped the tone, we've contained the dynamics a little bit. Now it's time to make it loud and contain the dynamics more. Inherently, to make it loud, you're going to contain the dynamics, as I said, because as you're pushing up against that loudest point, you have to inherently kind of smash those transients a little bit. And we're going to use something called a limiter for this. Now, limiter is just a brick wall limiter. It just sets a brick wall before that point where it could digitally distort, and it just doesn't let anything pass it. It turns it down if it tries to get past it. So it's really a very extreme compressor. And a lot of limiters are very easy to set, but very easy to mess up at the same time. So for example, let me show you like a really overcompressed signal. So I'm going to send a lot of volume into this. I'm going to turn it down a lot so it's not crazy loud for us. And listen to this, how just overcompressed and weird this sounds. But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep compared to pay attention to the drums. If you're having trouble hearing it, pay attention to the drums when I turn this on and notice that they just kind of get like weird and squished. But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in there. So that is pumping. If you've ever heard people talk about that, we want to try to avoid that here. So we're going to put this back to 0. Now, the output level you want to set to -1. That is the industry standard for the loudest point that it can be. So that's bringing, here's the digital distortion. This is just setting it just below that. So this is -1 is your output level. And then you're just going to be turning up the gain, which is the volume into that. Now, this is where you want to start paying attention to your metering that's on your master track. So our RMS value, we want to be looking for -12 to -9, generally speaking. Quieter songs, you might be a little bit lower, but in that range still usually. And then on here, we're looking at our LUFS score. Now, LUFS are a kind of complicated science of a meter, but really what you're looking for is on your integrated score that you are hitting at least -14 and generally a little bit higher. So in a previous video, at that time, it was really, the understanding was that, hey, Spotify is saying -14 is the loudest that it can be. So if you go louder than that, you're stupid because they're just going to turn it down. That's not actually played out in that way quite as much over time. And so what we found is that people are still mastering, pro engineers are still mastering to -8 as a standard, as they're like on a louder song, quieter on some quieter songs. But as I mentioned, even bands like Bleachers have moved away from being quite that loud, because as you get really close to that number, you're having to smash your song way up to that meter, or up to that limit, and that's going to like destroy the dynamics as we just heard. So the secret to doing this is doing it in small amounts. So if you are starting with just a little bit of containment with compression, for example, and you've already contained it with some in your actual mix, then on your limiter, you might be able to get by with just one limiter. But sometimes stacking limiters can help you get to that louder score without it being as obvious like we just heard, where it's really, really pumping. So let's go ahead and see where we are currently on both the RMS and the LUFS meter, and try to get closer to those numbers that our goal range is. So we're seeing about -18, so 19. So we can come up quite a bit to get to that minimum, like -12 range. And then on our LUFS score, let's see what we have here. And integrated is over a short period of time. We're just going to look at short term here, since we're not listening to the whole song. But when we get done, we want to check our LUFS score integrated, which will mean over the whole song.
What?
Okay, so we're seeing about -18. Now, my goal is -10-ish, maybe -11, but I want to get there in a way that's not hurting the sound either. So let's go ahead and use this limiter here, and I think right off the bat, I'm just going to bring it up, and I'm going to listen, and if I start to hear it in a negative way, I'm going to stop. But let's check this out here.
But I'm still standing there, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place. Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing.
Okay, so I'm getting closer here, but I'm not quite there yet. And I feel like I'm starting to hear it impact the drums a little bit more than I want to. It's always going to be a bit of a trade-off here, but I feel like I'm getting a little bit more than I want to. So what I want to do is try to spread out this load across two limiters. So I'm going to reduce this here to about -5, or +5, I mean, and I'm going to try to bring in a second limiter. So I'm just holding Option and clicking and dragging this down. So this is now my first limiter. This is my second limiter. And we're going to set this to -1 on the output level. And then I'm going to bring up the gain until I get a little bit more volume without it sounding terrible.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Okay. So okay, let's look at how we're doing on our meters here.
The universe expands, but I'm still standing there, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
So to me, it's really starting to affect the sound of the drums more than I want it to. So I'm going to settle for a slightly lower LUFS score than the ideal here, but I'm going to be happy with that because I know I'm not negatively impacting my music, and it's still going to be loud. Like, listen to how much louder this is. If I turn both of these off, listen to how much louder it is when I turn them on.
But I'm still standing there, dressed in my face.
So I'm getting volume. It's just maybe not quite as much as I'd hoped, but that's okay, right? Okay, so we're dialing in a good amount here. I think I'm okay with this point. I've scaled it back a little bit.
We keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place.
So now my last goal here is to make sure that it's not worse than the mix itself. So obviously, as I said, there's going to be a bit of a trade-off in terms of dynamics as you're pushing that volume up. So I might have a little bit more dynamics in my unlimited mix. But as I've applied this limiting, I'm going to contain that a little bit. So what I want to do now is go to my unmastered track here, and I want to listen to this. This is completely unprocessed. So it's the exact same song here, but I've not done any processing on it. And what I want to do is try to bring my mastered volume closer to this unmastered volume. So I'm just going to bring this volume fader down. A good starting point is typically 6 to 8 decibels.
Trust in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place. So stuck in place.
This is actually a little bit louder, my unmastered. Okay, so I just want to hear here that I don't dislike the way my master sounds relative to my unmastered song, and ideally I might even like it a little bit better. So let's just listen through this verse here into this pre-chorus and chorus one time, just flipping back and forth between these. So this is the mastered.
Job can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? Prove my work with a nice apartment. Maybe then I'll find a partner. Prove my work with a nice apartment. Maybe then. What? Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I like the tone of the mastered a little bit more. There is a little bit of the pumping that I can hear from the limiter, but not to the point that I don't like it. And in some ways, I almost like the way it sounds on the snare drum, the way it kind of fattens up the snare drum a little bit. So I am good with this, and I'm going to go ahead and hold Option and click on this to set it back to 0. And I'm going to make sure that I've selected this region. I'm going to go up to Share here, Export Song to Disk, and then we are going to go through this really quickly. So ideally, you are going to want to save it as a WAV for uploading to streaming platforms, but if you're just listening to it in your car or sharing it with your friends, an MP3 is fine. But WAV for all high fidelity, like where it's being distributed sources. And then uncompressed 24-bit. You can do 16-bit, but generally speaking, we're kind of moving towards 24-bit and higher. And then export cycle area, that means it's only going to export the selected region here. So since I've selected my song, it's only going to export that length. If you need to trim it down some, you can use the cycle region at the top and just set it just for the length of your song. So that is how you export out the song. Now, instead of doing that for you in this video, what I want to do is pull in our static mix, and I want us to listen really quickly from our earliest mix to our finished mix and then to our mastered version. So you can hear kind of the evolution of this song. So this is when we'd only set the volumes and we hadn't done any actual processing on the song. That's what this sounds like.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place.
Sounds fine, almost like a demo when you compare it to the mixed version, which is what we have here.
So stuck in place.
And then now we have this full loud version.
But I'm still standing here.
It's like a real final mixed mastered song, right? Okay, so that is mastering in GarageBand. You can see here how we've gone from raw tracks that we were recording, going through the mixing process, just incrementally doing small little tweaks, and now same thing in this mastering process, small little tweaks, and we have now shaped it into a very cohesive, professional sounding final product. So if you stick with this, you can do all this in GarageBand. It's completely possible. Now your song is going to be loud. Now it's going to be feeling up closer to those commercial releases. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of little tools that you can add in over time, but start with these 3 basic ones. EQ, compression, and limiting. And once you get a sense of those and feel confident moving through those 3 tools, then maybe try in adding in some of these other kind of advanced mastering tools, right? Okay, before you go, be sure to grab the Ultimate GarageBand Guide from the link in the description below. It's really going to help you out. As always, I'd love to hear from you. How do you approach mastering in GarageBand? Have you been doing it yourself? Have you been doing AI mastering? I'm personally not a big fan of that. Have you been using something like the Master Desk Classic? Still a great plugin, but something I moved away from because I just like to have the control and the separation of the individual stages. But Master Desk is great as well. But let me know in the comments below, how have you been approaching mastering before? And if you've never mastered before, are you going to try it after watching this video? Let me know in the comments below. If this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, subscribe.